job of welcoming. I think we've already done a good job of welcoming everyone to the meeting today. This is the SACOG board meeting. And I'd like to ask Councilmember Jay Chenier to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you, Rick. Everyone stand, please. Salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jay. At this point in time, I'd like to have the clerk make some housekeeping announcements, and then please call the roll to establish a quorum.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, board members, for being here with us, and our guest speakers. We appreciate you being here as well. Just a reminder, since we're participating remotely this morning, that when you're not speaking, if you could please just mute your device so we don't receive feedback through the meeting. And if you'd like to make a comment or you have questions, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom, just so we can better track who's wanting to speak. I'll go ahead and take roll now. Director Baines.
Present.
Bernasconi. Absent. Bradford.
Present.
Branscombe.
Yes.
Houlihan.
Present.
Burris. Absent. Clark Kretz.
Here.
Desmond.
Here.
Frericks.
I am here.
Frost. Absent. Gallardo.
I am here.
Gog. Absent. Gore.
Here.
Guerrero.
Here.
Harris.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Kozlowski.
Here.
Lozano.
Here.
Middleton.
Here.
New.
Here.
Sander.
Here.
Zaragoza.
Here.
Saylor.
Here.
Chenier.
Here.
Spokley.
Here.
Stallard. Absent. Soon.
Here.
Thomas. I'll let the record show she is on the call. West.
Here. Here.
Vice Chair Kennedy.
Here.
Chair Jennings.
I'm here.
And ex officio member Tacker for Benny Paul.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. We are now moved to our public communication, and this is a time for anyone who wishes to address the board on an item that does not appear elsewhere on this agenda. Lynette, did we receive any public comments from the public?
Yes, I do have a general public communication that I'd like to read into the record, if that's okay.
Please.
Thank you. The commenter is Michael Harris, and this is regarding the 2022 Juneteenth national holiday in the Sacramento region. 2021 President Joseph Biden signed legislation to establish a paid holiday for federal employees recognizing Juneteenth. Juneteenth recalls June 19th, 1865, when Union troops captured the final Confederate port on Galveston Island, Texas, and began a 7-week military campaign to seal the border with Mexico, free enslaved people of African descent, and confiscate cotton production for the U.S. Treasury. United States colored troops, many from the great state of California and our Sacramento region, participated in the U.S. Civil War to preserve the Union and begin the ending of chattel slavery here in the Sacramento region and throughout the nation. SACOG Board of Directors has in the past helped engage the Sacramento region toward positive change. Juneteenth offers the Sacramento region the opportunity to embrace our authentic California Gold Rush era history on the way to our unique California Juneteenth freedom story. The 1849 Gold Rush mining towns of Negro Hill, Mormon Island, and Negro Bar, California offer salient contributions to the forward flow of humanity. Honorable William Alexander Leidesdorff Jr., our African founding father of California, leads a long cast of hidden figures who played significant roles in the way on the way to California statehood. Free and enslaved people of African descent continue to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces and help preserve the freedom we all enjoy today. As chair of the California State Capitol Juneteenth celebration and past regional director of the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, I ask consideration for SACOG and regional leaders to join the cause, providing leadership toward a paid holiday for Juneteenth. And again, this is Michael Harris, the California Black Agriculture Working Group. And that concludes our general public communications.
Thank you very much. I know Michael Harris well. I know his work. I will make sure to respond to him and let him know. We have Juneteenth coming up in the month of June, many Juneteenth events. If anyone from the board would like to know about those events, we can get that information to you. But I'll be in touch with Michael and thank him for his comments to the board. We will now move to our SACOG. Is that the end of public comment?
Yes,
All right. We will now move to the SACOG consent calendar. And the consent calendar, the items are intended to be approved in one motion. However, anyone can remove an item for a separate discussion. Does a director at this point in time wish to remove one of the 8 items on the consent calendar? And I don't see any hands raised.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar, Mr. Chair. This is Frericks.
Veneer seconds.
Seconds.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Before we do that, Lynette, is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment on the consent calendar or remove it for discussion?
I have no public comments on this item.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. You have the names of those?
I believe it was Director Frericks and was it Director Baines as a second?
Yes.
Thank you.
Would you please, Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Yes, thank you. Director Baines,
Aye.
Bernasconi, absent Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Yes.
Boulahan,
Aye.
Burris, absent Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Desmond,
Aye.
Frericks,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Gallardo,
Aye.
Gog, absent Gore.
Aye.
Thank you. Guerrero,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Kozlowski,
Yes.
Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
New,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Saragosa,
Aye.
Saylor,
Aye.
Chenier,
Aye.
Spokley,
Yes.
Stallard absent Soon,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy,
Aye.
Chair Jennings.
Yes,
Thank you. Motion carries.
thank you so much. Okay, we will now adjourn as SACOG and convene as the Capitol Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways. Lynette, would you please update the roll call to include any members attending from the Capitol Valley Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways who have arrived since you called the SACOG roll?
Yes, thank you. Director Young, are you here? Thank you. Thank you for
Did you hear
joining.
me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you for
Okay.
joining us today. And Director Nguyen, are you here? Okay, it looks like he's absent. So the record will show that Director Young is here and present for the SAFE Board meeting.
Great, great. So the Capitol Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways, the agenda contains the following items: to approve the remote board meeting, 2, to approve the minutes of the June 17th, 2021 board meeting, and 3, to approve and release a draft fiscal year 2022-23 budget. Is there any director that has a question or a comment? Is there anyone from the public who also wishes to comment on these items? And if there is no comment, I would look for a motion to approve.
Move to approve by Baines. Taylor second.
Any additional comments at the point in time? Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you. Director Baines,
Aye.
Bernasconi, absent Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Yes.
Houlihan,
Aye.
Burris, absent Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Desmond,
Aye.
Frericks,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Dialdo,
Aye.
Gog, absent Gore,
Aye.
Guerrero,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Kozlowski,
Yes.
Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
New,
Aye.
Sander,
Yep.
Saragosa,
Aye.
Sailor,
Aye.
Chenier,
Aye.
Spokely,
Yes.
Stallard absent Soon,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
West,
Yes.
Wynn, absent Young,
Yes, of course the mic don't want to work when I'm trying to hit it. Yes.
no problem, thank you. Vice Chair Kennedy
Aye.
and Chair Jennings.
Yes,
Thank you, motion carries.
thank you so much. Okay, without any further questions or comments, we will now adjourn as the California Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways and reconvene as SACOG. Do you need to take roll at this point in time, Madam Clerk?
No, Chair Jennings, we're all set for roll, thank you.
Cool. Then let's hear action item number 9, which is to approve the final budget and overall work program for the fiscal year of 2022-2023. And my understanding is Lorette Sue, SACOG staff member, will present this item.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair and member of the board. Just give me 1 second. Let me just start my presentation here. Okay. Just want to make sure that can see my presentation. Okay, thank
Yes,
you.
we can.
Yes, so good morning again, Loretta Sue, SACOG staff. SACOG, as a federally designated metropolitan planning organization, is required to develop an annual overall work program, or in short, OWP, and budgets. This process involves many local agencies, state and federal partners, and it takes several months to complete. So I'm just going to give a quick highlight of the timeline in terms of the development of the OWP and budgets for the fiscal year 2022-23. Back in March, staff submitted a draft of the budgets to Caltrans and federal agency, and then also local partners for review and comment. Comments were received back in April. The board reviewed and approved the release of the draft for public comment. To date, staff had not received any comments from the public. So this morning, staff is seeking board actions to adopt the final budgets so staff can submit it for approval and begin expenditures of funds effective July 1st, 2022. Since there's not many changes from the draft to the final budget, so I'm just going to quickly highlight some of the minor changes that is incorporated in the final budgets. The final budgets reflects a net revenue increase of approximately 1.3 million. This includes 862,000 for the SACOG operation budgets. This is mainly due to the 2 new grants award that just recently awarded from Caltrans. This includes the Northern California Mega Region Zero Emissions Medium and Heavy Duty Truck Vehicles, Blueprint, and then also the Truxell Bridge Concept and Feasibility Study. So these are the 2 new projects that just recently awarded and included in the final budgets. There are no changes to the board and advocacy budgets. The SAFE budget, as you just heard, that was approved by the SAFE board, had an increase of 496,000, and is being included in SACOG budget and OWP because SACOG is contracted to perform the service on behalf of SAFE. The final budget and OWP also reflect the comments from partners. There's no fiscal impact to their comments, just some minor updates to the OWP. For more information, attachment I has all the comments from all the various partners and agency, and then SACOG responses to those comments. Just a quick highlights of the revenue for the fiscal year. Total revenue for the fiscal year 22-23 is $39.5 million, an increase of $862,000 comparing to the draft budgets, and an increase of $18 million comparing to the current fiscal year budgets. This is just sort of kind of a breakdown of the revenue source. Federal revenue makes up 27% of the total revenue, and then state is 54%. This is mainly due to the one-time funding for the REAP and then also the Green Means Go programs. Local and other revenue makes up the remaining 19% of the revenue for the year. Here's a quick overview of the budget's expenditures by category. Again, total expenditures, $39.5 million, an increase of $862,000 comparing to the draft budgets, an increase of $18.8 million comparing to the current fiscal year budgets. The pass-through costs and consulting costs makes up 61% of the total budget expenditures. Again, this is mainly due to the one-time funding that is associated with the REAP housing program and also the Green Means Go. Staff costs is approximately 26%, and then indirect and other costs is the remaining 13% of the budgets. For more information regarding these budget item, please refer to the attachment A, which show a comparison of revenue for the by funding source comparing to the draft budget and the fiscal year 2021-22 budgets. And then attachment C through attachment E, which show the expenditures and revenue by funding source, and then also the allocation of revenue and expenditures by projects in the OWP programs. As noted earlier, the board and advocacy budget did not had any change comparing to the draft budget. Total budget is $1.1 million and a slight increase comparing to the fiscal year 2021-22. Here's a quick breakdown of all the expenditures by categories. Staff costs is approximately 46% of the budget. Federal and state advocacy work is 35%. Partnership and board expenses is the remaining 19% of the board and advocacy budgets. This is just a quick highlights of all the changes and a summarized for the final budget for fiscal year 2022-23. Now happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. Passing the budget is one of the most important things that board members do. I think we all know that. Is there a director that has any question or comment that they'd like to ask at this time? Well, I can't see everybody, so you're going to have to help me in case somebody's hand goes up.
I don't see any hands, Chair Jennings.
Okay. Is there someone from the public who wishes to comment on the item, this item as well?
I see no public comment.
With that being said, I would look for a motion to approve, and if you would state your name for the motion and also for the second.
Kozlowski moves the item.
Lozano second.
Sounds like there was a tight race for second. I'm going to let you decide who won that race.
I think Lozano got it.
Okay, Kozlowski and Lozano. Okay. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Thank you. Director Baines,
Aye.
Bernasconi, absent. Bradford,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Yes.
Houlihan,
Aye.
Burris.
Yes.
Thank you. Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Desmond,
Aye.
Frericks,
Aye.
Frost,
Aye.
Gallardo,
Aye.
Gog, absent. Gore,
Aye.
Guerrero,
Aye.
Harris,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Kozlowski,
Yes.
Lozano,
Aye.
Middleton,
Aye.
New,
Aye.
Sander,
Aye.
Zaragoza,
Aye.
Saylor. Director Saylor, could you indicate your vote, please?
Aye.
Thank you. Chenier,
Aye.
Spokely,
Yes.
Stallard absent soon,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
West,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kennedy,
Aye.
and Chair Jennings.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, we are now ready for our workshop, and the workshop is the Next Generation Transportation System. And our fearless leader, James Corliss, is going to kick off this presentation and introduce our guest speaker. James, would you please take it from here?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Really delighted this morning to introduce my colleague, my peer from the San Diego region, Hassan Akrada. Hassan has had over 30 years of experience in the transportation field. His resume is pretty remarkable, and if I read it to you, we'd be here till noon. He is currently, as I said, the executive director of SANDAG. Before that, he actually was the executive director of the Southern California Association of Governments, so our peer down in Southern California. And by the way, if I am breaking up at all because of my broadband, please let me know. All right. Hassan's also worked for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. He's worked for the Los Angeles MTA. Almost nothing Hassan hasn't done. And one of the many reasons I appreciate Hassan, and I wanted him to come here this morning, and many of you got to experience Hassan and on our board tour of San Diego back in January 2020. Hassan is a straight shooter. Hassan is, I think, very, not only is he incredibly experienced, but I think the challenges he's dealt with in Southern California and now in San Diego, I think are really, really important lessons for us to learn. And a lot, I think, of what Hassan is going to talk to you about today is a little bit of the new approach we have to take to think about transportation and land use. The way we have to rethink our investments, the way we have to think about things like congestion pricing, like tolling. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Hassan. Hassan, thank you for flying all the way up to Sacramento to be here on Zoom. I wish that were otherwise, but we're still delighted to have you. Take it away.
Thank you, James. Chair Jennings, board members, good morning. I had the pleasure of meeting some of you. I was really looking forward to seeing you in person at SECAC today, but understandable, I will come back. It's good to be with you. And Chair Jennings, I was telling James that if I ever find a job here that where I will work with you, I'll take it. I don't care. So thank you. Thank you. You really are truly led by a CEO that's nationally recognized as a leader. I'm honored to know him and work with him for the many years in the past. So thank you for inviting me and the opportunity. As James said, I have many years in this business, and after 3 decades, I learned that you say it and you call it the way you see it, and I am hoping today, more than just me talking to you, that we will have a dialogue about the future, because the future is not decades away. The future is now. And frankly, I think the world has changed so much in the last few years, and it's going to continue to change, that if we're not careful, we're going to be left behind wondering why we didn't do certain things, especially when it comes to transportation infrastructure. So in the last 2.5 years or so, we had COVID. And frankly, I will tell you, and I think you will agree, this has changed our lives in ways that we still don't understand. I definitely don't know what the other COVID, what the other side of COVID looks like. And if any of you know, I would love to talk to them. I mean, it's not only that many of us will change their work habits or their way of communication, etc., but it really changed everything. And it changed the way we look at the infrastructure of the future. It's going to have to change it. It will be a mistake to formulate public policy based in the last 2 years now, because we still don't understand the impact of COVID. But it is important to continue the dialogue of what, if any, impact this is going to have on transportation. Like in San Diego, and Sacramento, and Los Angeles, where I was for many years, San Francisco, we all designed our lives around the car. And for the last many decades, all we talked about is how do we expand this highway, this freeway, build this interchange so we can drive faster. And finally, it caught up to us that expanding maybe actually is part of the problem, not the solution. And we definitely need to add capacity, but is adding that capacity by expanding or adding it by doing creative things? And that is, I'm going to talk about today, at least our experience in San Diego. So many regions in the country try to simply build freeways of many lanes. Houston, Texas, build 4 miles of 26 lanes, thinking that this is going to solve their congestion problem. That segment in Houston became the most congested after a few months it's open. And so obviously adding capacity this way does not solve the problem. Regardless of where you stand on global warming, greenhouse gas emission, there is something there that we need to pay attention to. Climate change, resiliency, sea level rise, change in weather, fires, all of those things have a reason. And we're not going to debate the philosophy of it, but whatever it is, we need to sustain ourselves into the future. We need to be the generation that's not selfish and not leave to our kids and grandkids a system, a great system that we inherited from our parents and grandparents. And so in addition to dealing with the congestion and all the urban ills, we do need to pay attention to climate change, air pollution, environmental sustainability. And again, this is not a philosophical discussion. This is a discussion about how do we sustain ourselves into the future. Now, California is the 5th largest economy in the world. And it's a wonderful place. I lived here for 35 years and it's home for me. And, you know, we are economically amazing state, but we have challenges. Housing is not affordable. Homelessness is getting out there. Transportation, infrastructure is being built the last 5 decades, but we're running out of solutions. So how do we move forward in a way that we add capacity to our transportation system? And I underline transportation system. It's not one mode against the other. It's not highway against transit. It is a system that has to work. So how do we add capacity to that system, at the same time comply with the laws of the land when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, air pollution, etc. I can tell you in San Diego, we said, okay, we will add capacity, not necessarily by building more lanes on the freeways, but we will add capacity by deploying technology. We will add capacity by looking at transit very differently. And let me just take a minute here to tell you about transit. James and I, all over the country, this discussion has been taking place. So transit ridership in the country has been declining pre-COVID, even before COVID started. And that phenomena, people said, wow, my gosh, how could transit be declining when we're spending all this money to build infrastructure? In Los Angeles, where I was, literally we were spending tens of billions of dollars expanding the transit system. And our transit ridership was declining significantly pre-COVID. So the question is why? At the time when I was the CEO of SCAG, I commissioned a study with UCLA and UC Davis and UC Berkeley to look at why is transit ridership declining and how could we justify these billions of dollars of investment? And the answer was simple. In Southern California, in the 6 counties of SCAG, all of Southern California except San Diego, between 2000 and 2015, Southern California added 2.5 million people. The same period, they added 2.9 million cars. There were 2.9 million cars bought. Prime borrowing and all of that contributed to that. But a car for somebody means a symbol of moving up in the world. So with all these cars and mostly the people who would likely take transit having access to a car, transit ridership declined. And then we had COVID and transit ridership hit bottom. I know in Los Angeles, the commuter rail system, which carried about 50,000 a day when I was there, the beginning of COVID, the ridership went to 1,000. Now, after the opening up a little bit, it's probably up to 11, 12,000. So the question is this: is fixed guideway transit the answer to solve our transportation system? And I believe the answer is no, but it is going to have to be part of the solution. Is expanding freeways the solution? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I would argue that continuing to rely on expanding could make it much worse. But is adding capacity to the freeway through technology, through pricing, which is politically unpopular. I know in San Diego, we actually put in the plan what we call a user charge, where we assume, in addition to a network of high occupancy toll lanes on every freeway, we assume a 2 cents per mile charge, not just to collect revenues, but to impact behavior. And I can tell you by doing that, the capacity of the system automatically went up by 20, 30% without adding many lanes. Now, granted, with today's gas prices and today's inflation and supply chain issue, it's not popular to talk about pricing. But honestly, I don't think any strategy, including expanding freeways without pricing the system right, will work. Recently, speaking to Times Magazine, they asked me the question, well, pricing is difficult politically. Do you have other ways to go about it? And I said this and I repeat it to you. Bad pricing kills good planning. I don't care how good of a plan you have. If you don't the price system right, it's not going to work. As politically unpopular to talk about it, it is really the thing that's going to be looked at to move this system forward. Because let's face it, many of us will continue to drive for many, many years to come. Granted, we'll be driving probably cleaner cars, electric cars, but still, even if we all drove electric cars, we're not going to get rid of congestion. We're not going to get rid of the capacity need. So in San Diego, we really looked at 2 things: technology to add capacity to the existing system, and pricing the system so that people change behavior, not to penalize them, but to give options and that we can fund. So we're not saying just price the system to price it, but price the system and make other options available that's comparable. Make what we did in San Diego as of May 1st, we made transit free for all youth 18 or younger. It's very popular right now. We have the ridership went up many folds because of that. We hope to have all transit free for all residents of San Diego by 2030. That costs money. And that pricing could come in, where you could price this system in such a way that provide alternatives, and that will free capacity on the highway system. So I think the point here is we can add capacity to the transportation system. but it does not have to be only by expanding or building new lanes. As a matter of fact, as I said, building new lanes might add to the problem. We have to be serious about deploying technology. We have to be serious about the fixed guideway transit is not the answer to everything. It will work in many places, but it won't work everywhere, given the way we're built and our urban form is. So we have to combine these strategies, pricing the system rights, providing logical alternatives. And when I say comparable logical alternatives, in San Diego right now, a trip that takes 20 minutes in the car will take 2 hours in transit. You shouldn't expect people to take transit with that. Not many people are willing to spend 2 hours commuting to a destination. So we need to make that 2-hour trip comparable to the 20-minute car. And how we do that? By building the transit of the future, by deploying technology. In San Diego, we believe what we call the next operating system, an app-driven system, is the most important thing you could do to make transit convenient. And transit does not have to be all fixed guideway. It can be a flexible fleet. A fleet similar to right now when we push a button and we order an Uber or Lyft. That is what the future transportation, public transportation system should be. App-driven. Before you leave your home, you already know your ride, you know how much it's going to cost you, you know how long it's going to take you, you know what route you're going to take. That is technology, and the technology exists today. Of course, people always tell me, well, in our nation here, we care too much about privacy, and therefore all these solutions that involve technology is going to take away our privacy. Now, I laugh at this sometimes because, you know, if you have a cell phone, you already written off your privacy. I sometimes read things about me by Googling me that I didn't know myself. And therefore, what privacy? But the bottom line is the public is not trusted and people think you're gonna spy on them or whatever. So we have issues to deal with, which one of them is privacy. And how do we deploy technology without violating that? Because that means a lot and important to many of our countrymen and women. And I believe we can. The technology is there today. I mean, right now we use toll roads and we have transponders. And I think we don't, in San Diego, we operate toll roads. We don't take people's privacy, but yet we collect the tolls and through transponders, we get some data. How do we deploy technology, price a system right, build the right transportation system? So if our residents need to have a choice, if I decide to drive, I should be able to and do it safely and quickly. If I decide to take transit, fine. If I decide to bike, walk, or if I decide to work remotely, I should be able to do it. So the world has changed. Whether we like it or not, the world has changed and we need to change with it. And I believe in San Diego, at least, and some of you seen the system we're talking about. In San Diego, we're proposing a complete corridor strategy that's data-driven. For the first time ever, at least in San Diego, we made data drive our decision. We use cell phone data to figure out the best solution forward. And in every corridor in San Diego, there's 12 corridors. In every one, we have what's called complete corridor. Other alternatives beside driving available, a pricing strategy that works, and the kind of transit that also works, and not necessarily always a fixed guideway, big trains or big buses. Sometimes could be a flexible fleet that's app-driven. And of course, you'll ask yourself, so where is the money going to come from to pay for this system? And that's a great question. Sometimes, if you want to avoid talking about this, you say, oh, well, we get money from federal and state governments, and we do. We all do. But I can tell you that no project, major infrastructure project I know of in our country except for the interstate systems in the 60s and 70s, has been paid for completely by federal and state money. Federal and state money comes in, it's great, but it always have to have a local contribution, a local match. So in our regional transportation plan that we adopted last December, we assumed that we're going to go to the voters in San Diego 3 times. And luckily in San Diego, there is a citizen group that have now a citizen initiative that's going to go this November to the voters. And the best thing about this, SANDAG cannot be legally involved in this. The best thing about it is this citizen initiative, this citizen group said, we want you to give us 0.5 cent sales tax because we want to pay for the regional transportation plan that you just adopted. We're not going to pay for any, not a penny worth of project outside that plan. That's wonderful. When your citizens see things the way you see it, when other groups trying to bring in funding to implement a plan. That's what's happening in San Diego. I wish them well, and we welcome any resources that implement the plan. So it's going to cost money. It's not going to be cheap. But as I often told my board, that nothing in history that worth anything that was not expensive and did not take a long time and did not cost money. Nothing. You know, anything that's worth something is going to cost money, is going to take time, is going to go through difficulties. That's no different for infrastructure. I believe it is time to upgrade our infrastructure, transportation and all infrastructure, but in this case, we're talking about transportation. And that future infrastructure is going to require commitment from you as leaders and a commitment to change. Change is difficult. You know, change is very difficult. I can tell you that some of my board members would want to kill me sometimes or fire me simply because I'm telling you the way I see it. And some of them want me just to you know, get some money, expand my freeway, and I'm telling them that's not going to solve the problem. But I want to provide you a system that works for many generations to come, that actually add capacity to the system. And it's never a fight between highway and transit or bikes and transit. It is building a system of the future that sustain ourselves into the future. And finally, I would say, we love to talk about transportation and infrastructure. We forget the urban form, the land use component. And MPOs like SACOG and SANDAG don't have land use authorities. But they're the one who was asked to put a plan that meets all these requirements. And by the way, oftentimes my board members ask me, well, what happened if we don't put a plan that meets the requirement? And my answer is very simple. The region I represent at SANDAG will lose hundreds of millions of dollars. And you don't see that. You quietly see, you know, application go in, money comes back because we check that box, that we have a plan that meets these requirements. So it's what you do is important. What the plan you adopt as leader is important, because that plan guarantees the hundreds of millions of dollars continue to come to your region to build the system of the future. And I think it is time for us to stop debating, bidding one mode against the other. I think it's time for us to say, the world is changing, definitely changing. You know, I remind you that disruptive changes that disruptive is sometimes could move so fast that public policy have to catch up to them. I'll give you a couple of examples. In the 1980s, AT&T, you know, a major company, was worried about the cell phone use. So they asked a very reputable consulting firm called McKinsey to tell them what would the cell phone use be in 2000. That was right, remember, in 85. McKinsey, which is a very excellent firm, came back and says, oh, don't worry about it. There will be 900,000 cell phone users. You couldn't be more wrong, right? There were over 200 million phones. So is transportation going to go through this? Well, we've been talking about autonomous vehicle, right? Are we ready for autonomous? James mentioned the broadband. Is the broadband situation there for autonomous fleet? Nobody questions that the technology will be there, but is the urban form ready? Is the transportation system ready for it? That's another question that we need to debate. And then finally, during COVID, we always knew that in this nation, we have a social equity, social justice issues. We knew that. But really, COVID brought it to the top. For years, we kept saying, we understand. I happen to be an adjunct professor, teach kids, graduate kids into the world, and I discuss with them this. And us for years, decades, saying we understand is no longer enough. We needed to deal with social equity and social justice in a serious way. And in a way that's more than just adopting an equity statement, which our board did, I'm sure your board did, many did. But we have to have a transportation system that reaches everyone, that gives access to opportunities to everyone. Freeways divided communities. There is the ills of the past. How we overcome in the system of the future is really important, because you don't want the future generation to say, wow, we inherited a system that further build these barriers. These social justice issues are real. So the system of the future not only have to take into account the new technological advancing, the pricing, but has to take into account social justice and social equity. I know we don't have a lot of time. I would love to hear from you and debate with you, but I want to conclude by saying this. It's really an honor to be here, first of all. And second of all, this is no longer a debate about somebody taking advantage or SANDAG competing with SECAG or SECAG competing with SCAG. This is about how do we in California and in the nation and in the world move into a future where we think mobility becomes a service like utilities. And how do we do it in such a way that's sustainable, that does not further create the urban ills we have today? Thank you very much for having me. And with that, I will stop and I'll be happy to take any questions.
You have been incredible. I've got a whole page of notes, some of the things that you said. And one of the things that kind of resonated with me the most was that we do not want to be the generation that is selfless. We do not want to take away from future generations based on what we're doing right now. So that really resonated with me, as well as many other things that you said. But I want to thank you for your presentation. And I do want to open it up for any director that has any questions that they'd like to ask based on what you presented. If you're open to do that, right? You want questions?
Absolutely.
Cool. So I'd like just to open it up for, I see Sue Frost has her hand up. So Sue, let's go. And then Jay Schneer after that.
Thank you, Chair. Hassan, thank you so much for your presentation. My question relates to the conversation around transferring everything to a phone app. And what I'm wondering is, and I haven't asked this at my board even yet, but it's come to my attention most recently that there could be electromagnetic field impact with all this infrastructure that we're building that could be unhealthy for people. And I wonder if you have looked into this. Has this been part of the conversation? And do you have any studies that you can refer us to that would give us some confidence that that public health would be assured in the we're building something, but is what we're building going to be safe for our communities? Yeah.
Ms. Frost, thanks for the question. And I would say this, I don't have any a specific study, but I can tell you that none of the solution that involve technology being put forth that definitely will violate the public health element. So if I can tell you in this nation in general, we spend a lot of time studying, not building, because of these aspects. We looked at everything. We're probably one of the few countries in the world that we spend as much time studying and analyzing. So I can guarantee you that the next operating system or with magnetic elevation, that will be looked at in ways that we probably get sick of hearing about it. But I do not believe any of the future transportation system technologies we're talking about so far has yielded any such a study that conclusively said there is a health impact. Of course, there could be. I'm not an expert in this. I will definitely, I appreciate your question. I will see if I could get my hand on something that said something to the contrary. But right now, there is no evidence that where we're going is going to create any public health crisis.
I mean, I guess the reason I ask it is because it's kind of like a microwave. You know, it used to be in the olden days. I think I'm in my over mid 60s, I'm ashamed to say, but in the olden days, we used to worry that the microwave wasn't sealed around the outside of the microwave door, wouldn't be properly sealed to protect us from the electromagnetic waves, which basically, from what I understand, is basically just moving things in there. And so it stands to reason that if that is what that is, and we're in the midst of it, it could potentially be impacting our biology. And so I do think, I think it's a reasonable question.
It is.
That people ask. I don't know a lot about it. That's why I'm bringing it up.
It is. And Ms. Frasto, just so you know that people ask question about, even being in an electric car. Does that do something to your health close to these?
Oh, really?
Okay. So there is all kinds of questions that need to be studied for sure. But I also go back to the point I made. Technology is moving so fast that, we need to take a breather and we need to make sure public policy follows that. I give you an example in San Diego. When you visit San Diego, you see scooters everywhere, right? This is an area where you have micro-mobility scooters everywhere thrown in the street. Accident happened because of them, because we didn't have a public policy. So we had to carry the public policy. So we need public policy to hurry up a little bit because technology is moving so fast.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Director Chenier.
Thank you, Chair. Hassan, thank you so much for coming up.
Of course.
We appreciate it. And we look to you as our idol in doing a lot of the work that we're doing and hope to replicate a lot of the things you're doing. I do have one quick question is, I don't think anyone expected gas prices to be where they are today, a year ago, 2 years ago, or pre-COVID, certainly. Has that changed? There seems to me that there's an opportunity there. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but has that changed how you're doing this, how you're putting out the initiative, or how your citizens initiative is happening? What impact has that had?
Great question. And don't get mad at me by saying this, we're really spoiled in this nation. We've been paying, Europe has been paying $10 a gallon for the last decade and a half. And, gas prices is worldwide, one price, but there's a lot of taxes that goes in Europe. So I think gas prices right now is significant for many people. I think filling the car up is becoming difficult. Did that factor into our, no, actually, we didn't know gas prices is going to be where it is. Would that change what we're proposing? No, either. I believe very strongly, and go back to pricing the system right, Mr. Schreiner, that if we price the system right, the relevance of gas prices becomes only if you have an option, other options. So for example, if I right now tell you, I'm going to make gas prices $10 a gallon, and you have no other way than driving to go, I'm penalizing you. That's not fair. But if I give you as convenient of an option, and I'm telling you, your driving require you to pay the full cost of driving, that's fair. I think gas prices right now is impacting many people. It's unfortunate sometimes it will impact the low income more than anybody else. I think we need to deal with that issue, but the system we're talking about is a system where you have choices. And if you have choices, you choose based in your own situation what that choice is. I don't think anybody expected gas prices at this time to be what it is today. I think if you go for Europe as an example, one of the reasons they invested heavily in other choices like good public transportation, one, they're more denser than ours, but also they have the resources through gas, through taxation of gas to do these other sources. I don't think we should do anything to penalize people here, because what we do sometimes will penalize even the low income further. But what we should do is make sure whatever system is price is fair for everyone. Gas prices, if they continue this way, is going to impact, people react to when you ask them to pay for half a cent sales tax, and the gas prices this way is negatively impact the ability of them to say yes. But we're hoping that people see, at least in San Diego, we're hoping that people say, you're paying half a cent sales tax and you might go through a hardship, but this half a cent sales tax invest in the future for your kids and grandkids. And we're talking about our infrastructure is not only getting old, it's not sufficient anymore. We have to build the infrastructure, but gas prices did not factor into our thinking when we put the plan out.
And I just want to commend you guys on free rides for young people. We've done the same thing in Sacramento. Our ridership is for young people is now greater than pre-COVID. It has gone up much faster than anything else. And it's the best way to get a new generation of riders, I think. So thank you for doing that.
I agree. I think our ridership is, we just started last May 1st. And for San Diego, this is unimaginable. I mean, they've been working on it for a while, and we finally, with my team, said, okay, we're going to find this $15 million and we're going to find it legally. We're not going to steal it, but we're going to find $15 million to do that. And I think I get texts and emails from young people telling me, oh, we love public transportation because we can go anywhere with my friends. We want this generation to be used to this. I was talking to Mr. Jennings last night. This is not only about just getting more riders. This is about a whole generation getting used to this
culture
choice.
and habit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Culture and habit. Yeah, thank you.
Director Soon.
Thank you, Chair. Hassan, likewise, it's good to see you again.
I'm here.
Thank you. We really appreciated touring your area down there. I hear what you're saying in terms of pricing right, and I wanted to get a glimpse on how you consider when you look at other options. If you're pricing in terms of getting people out of cars, if you have a transit system that isn't complete, it's more inconvenient to ride, right? Now that choice, that pricing of a car versus an incomplete transit system, which makes it more or less convenient for me to ride. Where do you draw the line in terms of infrastructure, capital improvements?
Excellent. So first of all, I do not propose that, and in San Diego, we are not proposing to implement any pricing before we build that system that makes it comparable with the car, because otherwise you would be penalizing people. Right now, 70% of our residents have no other choice but to go by car. And those who ride in transit right now, 70% of them are transit dependent. So we don't have a transit system for choice riders. We really don't. And oftentimes, it's unfortunate, but oftentimes we cut corners when we plan transit. Just give you an example. And Mr. Stone, you probably saw it when you came to San Diego. Give you an example. So we just opened last November, we delivered to San Diegans the largest infrastructure project in San Diego's history, $2.17 billion, 11-mile light rail system from downtown to University of San Diego, University of California in San Diego. Now in San Diego, you can have a one-seat ride from the border all the way to the university. That's parallel to I-5. Now you could ride the light rail, or you could drive on the I-5. If you take the light rail, it will be shorter in time in the peak than if you drive. That is what I mean comparable. Right now, I could talk about pricing that route, but many places in San Diego is not ready for pricing. You can't penalize people and just price it. You provide choices and then you price it. And that is fair. So I don't think we're anywhere ready to price the system. That's why in our plan, we assumed that strategy to be in 2030. We needed a decade to make sure that it works to the point where it does not penalize anybody.
Chair Jennings, do you mind if I just jump in on this pricing thing for a second? And again, thank you, Hassan.
Sure.
Matt, come here and give us your straight shooter take on things, and you've done that as I knew you would. And we know that pricing is not a popular thing to talk about, but as Hassan has said, that's not our job. Is to give you some ideas about how we think we can build a 21st century transportation system. Imagine for a second, look, I hate paying more on a Friday or a Sunday to fly. I can't stand it, right? I actually fly on Thursdays or Saturdays to avoid that. Our transportation system right now is as if we don't have any, it's the same flat fee. Everybody flies on Fridays and Sundays, and we'll ask the airlines to buy twice as many planes, and then it'll sit idle for the rest of the week because we're just trying to accommodate demand. That's essentially how we're approaching transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you asked any CEO of an airline to do that, they would tell you it's crazy, right? But that is essentially how we've approached transportation for a long time.
Absolutely. I would say you're all smart people, you're leaders. Any goods that you don't price right, if you say something is for free and something worth would make people think. This is a public good. This is a good that we all paid for. And I think pricing it right is just fair, but you don't want to price it at a point right now where you can start penalizing people, or especially a segment of the people that you're trying to help. You have to be very careful. Like James said, this is very politically unpopular topic, but it's time to talk about it. I mean, you as leaders owe it to have that public policy debate. A difficult public policy debate always leads to good policies put forward. But I do agree with James. It's not right what we're doing in the transportation system.
Okay. Director Gallardo and then Director Zaragoza.
Thank you. I am loving this conversation. And as a school bus transportation nerd, I have to put a play in here. One of the things we specifically talked about is creating the habits of public transportation. California is the worst in the United States for school bus transportation. 15% of our kids ride the school bus, where nationally it's nearly 60%. And we already have the system in place. On the safest, California bus is the safest vehicle in the nation, as NHTSA has told us, with supervision. So you can get the younger kids, because the school bus actually supervises the kids, where public transit is not going to write a citation for behavior to the school. So the reason that we don't have school bus service, there's absolutely no funding source. It has to come out of classroom dollars. And you look at it and think, how are we not behind that when we are encouraging public transportation? So I just have to put my pitch in there. We have a system that can help in place now.
Yeah, I agree. And by the way, just right now in San Diego, we finally connected all of our universities to rail. The youth pass for mainly high school. We're actually, as I shared with Mr. Jennings, right now trying to find the money to move to the 24 and under. Because like you said, it is getting this generation exposed to options that they thought it's not there. Actually, not many people think it's there. And finally, I would say, appreciate the comments, because like right now, we made an agreement with University of California in San Diego that the train pass is part of the tuition. And it doesn't matter who pays it, but at least students know that they're registering for their classes and they have that option, a free option to ride transit. They paid for it somehow, somebody paid for it, but we need to, that's what I mean, we need to start thinking differently about transportation in the future, because the future is here and the past cannot be deployed to move forward.
Thank you so much. Director Zaragoza.
Thank you, Chair. And Hassan, it's good to see you again. I
here.
thoroughly enjoyed the tour when we were down in San Diego, so I'm glad to see you back. And too bad we weren't able to do this in person, but just a question. I know we brought up autonomous vehicles, and I'm a big believer in how that paradigm shift's going to be when whatever number we get to in terms of autonomous vehicles will change dramatically our transportation patterns. And I'm just wondering how you're looking at that in San Diego and how you're planning for it, because I do think a lot of the problems we have today, they won't be solved, but I think just everything from auto repair stores to how we police our freeways and different things will dramatically change when you have X amount of autonomous vehicles, at least how I see it. So I'm just wondering how you're planning for that in San Diego.
It's a great question, and it's good to see you again, Mr. Zaragoza. I think it's a great question, and this is a question now many economists and experts, including our own economists, are trying to figure out. So what's the impact, if any, of this changing world of autonomous mobility as a service, the shared transportation we're talking about? And let me just say this, in San Diego, what we did at Sandag last November, we released what's called Request for Information Concepts. And this is to tell the private sector, because that's where the innovation is going to happen. Give us some ideas of how we connect certain places in San Diego. And by the way, we don't want you just to spend your own money. If we pick you, we're going to put our own public funds to develop whatever technology you come up with. And so the impact will be gradual. Now, a lot of people were forecasting that by now, by 2020, we would have everybody running around in an autonomous car. That's not going to happen. I think there's a different level of autonomous technology. I mean, is it level 3 or level 5? Is it level 2? I mean, right now the technology is there. I mean, if my daughter have a Tesla, and you could do a lot of things in Tesla without your involvement. Having said that, is our urban form, the way we're designed, ready for that? I don't think so. I think we're decades away from that. I think the technology that's going to be deployed in the car is going to be, first of all, it's going to be definitely most of us in California will be driving, and the nation will be driving electric cars. And the question is, are we going to have issues with providing electricity for all these electric cars? Is our tax system? I mean, if we all drove electric cars, we'll generate $0 to gas revenue. So what we're going to replace gas taxes by vehicle mile travel tax or some form of taxing? All these discussions that politically not popular, we found ourselves, James and I and our teams find ourselves, how could we, with a straight face, go to you and ignore them? We can't. So autonomous vehicle impact on all these industries and the economy is a great topic right now, but I can tell you that it's not going to be as fast as people expecting in terms of full conversion. I am sure we're going to see, and back to what we released in San Diego, we want a shared electric, preferably autonomous public transportation system that's app-driven to be in San Diego, but for certain goals, for certain routes, because again, of the urban form, the broadband, all kinds of issues that surround that. But once that happens, it's like the disruptive technology change. It's like the cell phones. once happened, there's no going back. I mean, imagine right now if you have kids, teenagers, and imagine them being without their phone for a few minutes. I have 2 kids at home, and when my landline rings, they startle. They think, what's that? So, I mean, the world will sometimes change in spite of the impact around us. And that's what technology does, destructive technology does.
Okay. Madam Clerk, am I seeing any other hands up?
I don't see any other hands.
Okay, this would be the time. If you have a question, I'm going to give you one more opportunity. And if not, if you will all give me a round of applause for Hassan. Great job, Hassan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Outstanding. We deeply appreciate this. And we look forward to our time in San Diego together when we come down there for the Metro
Love
Chamber.
to have you. Looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.
They told me you have a restaurant in mind that you.
I do. This is, we'll have to cook for you at home and bring it like it's from a restaurant, but thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay. So at this point in time, we have a couple of information items that I'd like to take the chair's privilege and switch those items. The item number 11 is the Executive Director's Performance Evaluation Update. Kurt Tross, General Counsel, is going to present this, but I'd like that item to go after the next item, item number 12, which is the SACOG review and analysis of the proposed Citizens Transportation Tax Initiative. So I'd like to take that item now. I'm not, just from a timing standpoint, it works better for those that we want to present on this item to do that. So I just want to get you ready for that we're going to switch those items. And if we don't have time for item number 11, I have another plan in place as far as being able to address that item. Okay, so let's go to item number 12 right now. And I want to say a few things just to kick off this item and provide some context for the discussion. First of all, I want to make it clear that this is an information item. So I would tell you, if you were in my classroom of high school students or college students, I would tell everybody, say information items, just so everybody is clear. This is an information item. I'm not going to do that though, because you're not in high school, you're not in junior high school, you're grown up and elected officials. So I think you know the difference between an action item and an information item. Item is not agendized as an action item, and there's no action that we're going to take on this item today, but we are going to have a discussion. The analysis and our discussion today is really for us to begin to understand what this initiative is and understand what it means for our region. Our regional plan and all of us sitting around this board table. What is the impact that this item has on all of us, positive and negative? Secondly, I hope that you'll be able to see from the staff memo and analysis that this is really important and indeed potentially significant. As policymakers and decision makers, it's important that we understand both the benefits from a transportation measure like this, but also understand the risk. And the potential risks are that they are real and they could impact all of us in all 6 counties. And then finally, once we digest and discuss it today, I'm hoping that our committee process will help support the opportunity for us to work together with the proponents to achieve our mutual goals of additional transportation and transit funding while meeting our required GHG reduction targets and supporting our long-range 6-county transportation plan and the regional planning process that we have invested in so much over the last 2 decades. I am now pleased to present our Executive Director, James Corliss, to give a presentation on the SACOG staff and analysis, and then immediately after that, I'd like to invite my colleague, my friend, my coworker, Daryl Steinberg, to give some remarks about this effort to forge a plan with the proponents that address the concerns outlined by the staff. James, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am gonna try to share my screen. I hope this is working. Can you all see that?
We can.
Okay, I'm trying to. I don't know if it exactly is doing what I want it to do here. You see it well enough, though?
You want to take the full screen or you want to keep the things on the side?
I want to ideally take the full screen. Let me try one more time. How about that?
There you go.
All right. All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really appreciated. And it was, I think, great timing for my colleague, Hassan Akrada, to come and talk to you all for the workshop and to set this up. Because in many ways, I'm sure, I would guess this morning, we might get into a lot of specifics, we might get into the weeds. But essentially, this is about some really big picture issues, and as the chair just set up. And it's a lot about the issues, I think, that you just heard from Hassan. So I'm going to run through this. As Chair Jennings said, we have Mayor Steinberg on the line here, who's going to go after me, and let's go. So I hope you all had a chance to digest the analysis. I recognize that you had about 48 hours, and we never like to do that, but there were a lot of reasons that we were trying to hold this. But we wanted at least to get it in front of you today, because as Chair Jennings said, it's a lot. It's a lot to understand. It's a lot to wrap your heads around. We want to have a discussion because we are hopeful that there will be more to come on this next month. So as the chair said, there is indeed significant risk in this initiative. There's benefit and there's risk, right? And as policymakers, it is partly our job here today to provide that information analysis and to make sure you understand both the benefits and the risks. And in this case, as drafted, this initiative, if we took this into our plan, it would indeed have a big impact on a number of measures, but this specifically, of course, is on the greenhouse gas target. And I want to be clear, because this is one of these big picture issues I think it's we're going to have to keep working on, not just this month and next month, but in the years to come, as we have done since the blueprint, which is it is both about transportation, but it is also about the growth and the land use changes that come from those transportation investments. So our analysis, and as we say in the memo, there are caveats on this. We had limited time, limited information. I'm sure there will be questions about the analysis itself, which is why we convened a peer review panel of experts. But our analysis shows that significant enough in terms of this initiative to fall short on our greenhouse gas target. And significant enough, if that actually might happen, that there would be a risk to our 6 county regions' competitiveness for state funding. As we say in the memo, that's real. We have done really well as a 6 county region over the last 3 years. We have competed and won for $447 million in awards in transportation and housing funding. And I do believe, I think as we mentioned in the memo, I understand, I think that's not widely understood necessarily, that there are these requirements to be competitive or to even be eligible that we meet our greenhouse gas target. Those are real. That is part of our job to make sure we are competitive. We don't sideline ourselves on future funding rounds at the state level. All right. So we've got my staff on the line here, can certainly answer questions. We looked at all the initiative projects that are in this measure. As you can see in the memo, and many of you know this, it's a proposed half-cent increase. The sales tax, 40 years, 8.5 billion. And as I mentioned, the land use piece, and this is always the thing that we have to kind of keep remembering and keep working on and not silo transportation and land use. A lot of the impact is both from transportation, but also from the growth, the impacts of the growth that might occur as a result of building the projects in the measure, accelerating the projects in the measure, Those are real things. We've been working on that. That is part of what we do in our long range plan, or MTP-SCS. But those kinds of impacts are real from a transportation perspective and a greenhouse gas, but also from a growth and development that is out of alignment with where we want to be as a plan and as a region. So I know it's hard to see this in the screen, but this is just in terms of this is all in the technical memo in your attachments. We fall short about 1.75 to 1.81% in terms of our analysis. And again, that's a lot about both the transportation projects, but the growth that is induced potentially from the measure as written. So a lot of you have this question. So let me try to answer these as directly as I can. Why did we produce this analysis? Well, as you know, and I know Mayor Steinberg is on the line here, and he was incredibly helpful to work on this 2 years ago. The language from the 2020 measure, and it's very similar, this initiative, to the 2020 STA measure, but the language has changed. I've talked to many people over the last few months that some folks who think this is exactly verbatim. It's not. The language has changed, and it's changed in a couple of really important ways for us as a regional agency who are stewards of the regional plan and the regional greenhouse gas target on your behalf. One of the big changes is that language that Mayor Steinberg helped get in 2 years ago into the STA measure has changed. It was weakened. We worked very hard with the proponents last December and over January to make sure that that language wasn't weakened. We went back and forth many times. And when it was, and when we realized that would happen, I want to be clear. I said at that point in January, we would have to do an analysis of what this measure, this initiative would mean for the region if those changes were made. So this is that analysis that we're presenting today. There are a lot of projects in this initiative that are not in our long range plan, at least 26 large capacity projects, potentially actually over 70, depending on project scope and definition. And as the chair said, implications for the entire 6-county region. So I recognize, as somebody who thinks a lot and all the time about how to communicate complex issues, when we talk about our plan and we shorthand this, and I've heard from many of you, we've got a new name and a brand for our upcoming plan, the MTP-SCS. I do understand that I think for many people in the region, policymakers, elected officials, stakeholders, citizens, it's really hard to understand what this is, this MTP-SCS. And you may well ask questions, well, if it's not in the plan, can't we just add those projects to the plan? Why is this a big deal? Well, it is a big deal. And it's a big deal because this is probably, both the most complicated thing we do together as 28 jurisdictions and the most important. The MTP-SCS, we update it every 4 years. You adopted the last one in 2020. Many of you were here for that. It is the place where transportation, land use, housing are all aligned. It is still the strategy that's informed by this region's award-winning blueprint from 2004. It is not a wish list. It can't be, and it hasn't been for some time. We are proud of our ability to develop that plan as a strategic plan, not a stapling exercise. It is a critical gateway into state and federal funding for projects, and we must meet many criteria, many state and federal goals and targets and standards, in particular, our state greenhouse gas target and federal air quality standards. So again, we might get into some of the mechanics of negotiations that are ongoing and the release of this memo and this analysis. But I want to make sure that we also keep some very high level 30,000 foot perspective on this. The substantive issues in play with this initiative are the conflict between advancing projects locally that are incompatible with a regional plan. There are implications. If we miss our greenhouse gas target, we've told you we have actually a lot of risk in terms of being competitive for state funding. But remember how important it is to actually meet those targets, because programs that the board has led on, like Green Means Go, and you feel proud of, are actually predicated on closing that gap and meeting our target. There are many implications to this. I mentioned the land use and growth impacts of transportation projects, something we should never forget, and we can't, and is really in play here. And finally, as the chair said, I as a transportation person who spent my career looking for funding for transportation, I understand this is This is a really difficult, challenging question, right? The benefit of a 40-year guaranteed revenue source versus the risks that are also inherent. So we don't say that lightly. We know that there are tremendous benefits with this. And so finally, I want to close on this. And I've talked to many of you and tried to get you up to speed in the last few days about where things stand. Is there a pathway? Is there a solution? I believe there is, and you have my commitment 100% to find that solution. I mentioned the greenhouse gas language back in December and January. I think it was very unfortunate that language changed because we worked so hard on it 2 years ago in the STA measure. And again, we were very clear from the outset, starting in January, that if that language changed, we'd have to produce an analysis and tell you all and the region and the decision makers what it means. We have been actively working with the proponents of the initiative since April on a path forward. Mayor Steinberg, really glad he's on the call this morning, playing an absolutely key role in negotiations. So this is really, in my mind, a two-step process. Today, understand our analysis, understand what it means, understand the benefits, the risks. Today, this was our last possible chance, I believe, for the board to do that, which is why you have the memo and the item today. And then my hope is a potential mitigation strategy, and that would come back to you. I believe the last possible time it would be through your June committee and board cycle. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and conclude my presentation. Looking forward to the discussion. Mayor Steinberg, if you're on the line, I believe you're up.
I am on the line. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Jennings, my colleague and friend. Thank you, James Corliss. Thank you to all the members of the SACOG board and all the people who are interested in this very, very important topic. I really appreciate the opportunity to present here this morning. And frankly, I'm glad that you accorded me the privilege of going first, because it is my hope that what I am about to present will make the analysis in the study before you outdated before it becomes an inevitable fight. For this is an important moment for my county, my city, and the region's future. And I believe we have a chance going forward to do something extraordinary together. As James, you said a moment ago, for the past 5 weeks, I've led intensive discussions and negotiations between the proponents of the potential 2022 Sacramento County Transportation Ballot Measure and SACOG staff, including yourself, over how to resolve the controversies surrounding the current circulated initiative. Once the parties have signed off on final substantive language, I believe there is a way, with all the good lawyers from all sides sitting down, to make the agreement binding and to fully inform the voters of its content. The proponents have authorized me to say that they are in agreement with what I am about to detail, subject to minor clarifying language. I have been working closely with SACOG, but understand, as James laid out, that the staff and board must actually see final language before hopefully finalizing your support. But first, I want to provide some brief context, and I appreciate a few minutes here because I think this is a very important moment. The proposed November 22 Sacramento transportation measure is vitally important. It's timely, and at the same time, it is understandably controversial. It is vitally important because if it passes, it would provide billions of dollars for our county's roadway and transit systems, desperately needed. It's timely because this may be the last voting cycle where a citizen's initiative raising a special tax can be passed with a majority vote instead of a 2/3 vote. It is controversial, as Mr. Corliss laid out, because SACOG and many advocates have raised genuine concerns about whether the funding plan is inconsistent with the region's 19% GHG reduction target. I have multiple reasons for my own concerns. I'm the mayor, of course, of the region's largest city, with real air quality and climate challenges. And I authored SB 375 in 2007 when I was a member of the state Senate. One of my proudest bills, and very controversial itself in its passage and ultimate signature by Governor Schwarzenegger. The bill, of course, requires all the major regions of this state to strive to make better land use and transportation decisions in a way that contributes to the improvement of the climate. And of course, it's at the heart of your have committed to a 19% GHG reduction, and future federal and state funding depends on your doing all that you can to meet it. The issue, of course, I'm just gonna lay it out plainly. The issue, of course, is the connector, specifically the middle segment. Following is my opinion and states clearly why a compromise is essential. On its own, the connector project has real merit, as it has the potential to significantly reduce congestion. On the other hand, the project by definition will have GHG impacts, and if not mitigated, will undoubtedly have a serious impact on the region's ability to meet its 19% target. The current circulated initiative takes SACOG out of its legal role under SB 375 to determine its GHG impact and what mitigation would be necessary to offset it. So the questions and the controversy that brings me here today and that involve these last intensive 5 weeks seek to settle two questions. What is the necessary mitigation and who determines it? And yes, how to ensure a fair process. I believe that we have an answer that is fair to all stakeholders and will be good for the county and good for our region, good for reducing congestion, and give us the best chance to meet or exceed our region's climate target and ensure that we qualify for hundreds of millions of future state and federal transportation dollars. When we finalize this agreement, which I hope we will, subject to ratification, in the days and weeks ahead, as I said at the beginning, the study before you, I hope, will be out of date. And so I want to give you a high-level summary of the term sheet. Again, subject to some final clarifying language, but here are the elements. There are 5 major provisions. Number 1, the $300 million in the transportation initiative for the connector would be conditioned on the following: SACOG board defining its GHG impact, the necessary mitigation to offset that impact with various options for how to mitigate the impact, and the connector authority accepting one of the necessary mitigation options. That would be the trigger for the $300 million being freed for the connector. And it would be bonded upfront in a way that would allow the connector authority, upon approval of the mitigation plan, to be able to access it. Number 2, SACOG would agree to bring forward a specific scenario which includes the connector. So the connector would be analyzed and the mitigation would be laid out in a very transparent way. Number 3, SACOG would commit to providing STA and the project proponents the necessary guidance for a potential pathway for the connector into the MTP, so long as the project is appropriately mitigated. In other words, SACOG would commit to working with the connector authority in good faith to try to achieve the desired result. Number 4, very important, as a strong incentive for SACOG to work with the connector authority, the initiative would provide an additional $300 million for climate mitigation that would be directed to SACOG if the connector is funded. And of course, there's that incentive, but there's also a natural nexus between the potential funding of the connector and additional money to offset the potential impact of the connector. The two would go together. $600 million in total. 5, there would be a new 100 California Mobility Center. And I think this is a key provision that would bring everybody from the region together as we create a new economy and new industries, new job opportunities around clean energy and climate. Those are the provisions, the high level provisions. And I think that this is worthy of your consideration. We are very, 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 I would urge you, obviously the study is what it is. I wish I had the opportunity to present this separate from any controversies and just to present this, but you know, this is a moment. I would just urge you all to not fight, spend less time fighting about the study, and let's spend our time coming together, agreeing to the substantive terms, and then working to amend the initiative and inform the voters and pass this necessary historic measure together in November. Let's grab the moment and let's get this done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. James, did you want to respond before I start taking questions from the directors?
I have a lot to say, but go ahead, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
Okay.
Say that again.
So go ahead, Mr. Chair. Proceed with questions.
Okay. Okay. Now, my understanding was the mayor has another speaking engagement, and that I don't know if he's still on the line or whether or not this will be just a discussion among directors.
Chairman Jennings, I have just a quick question that James can probably clarify for the group before we get going on others. I think would be useful.
Okay, I'll take it and then I'll start giving the order that I think we have. I'll just start calling names, okay? But
Yeah,
just start us off.
Yeah, so it was pointed out that the language regarding the GHG goals was changed from the initiative in 2020 to 2022. James, could you elaborate on what specifically the change is? Because it sounds like largely it was potentially handing some responsibility for choosing mitigation strategies from SACOG to STA, I'm guessing. Or is that a fair assessment, or is it something else?
More to project sponsors, individual project sponsors. So it takes the role of the MTP SCS out of this, the role of SACOG, which is what the mayor was describing. Originally, that language from 2 years ago also required you to be eventually in the MTP SCS to actually have access to measure funding, which we worked very hard on. And then it really puts the project sponsors, as the mayor said, put project sponsors in the role of determining their own GHG impacts and removes a lot of the responsibility from them.
Okay, thank you very much. Just thought that would be useful clarity for everybody.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to take the questions in a popcorn fashion unless Lynette has the order of who got their hand up first.
Chair Jennings, I did see Director Frost with her hand up first, and then I believe it was followed by Director Kennedy and then Director Desmond.
Okay, let's go with that order then.
Thank you, Chair. Let's see, I have a couple questions. My first question is, with this report, who was at the table for the conversation with the report? I mean, you're saying this report is provided by SACOG staff or by SACOG, yet it's presented by Mayor Steinberg, who's not on SACOG, but I'm trying to figure out who was in the conversation to prepare the report.
We prepared the report, Director Frost. That's SACOG staff. Yeah, these are so two parts, right? One is the analysis. Mayor Steinberg was just talking about the possible solution, a pathway to a solution. The analysis is absolutely prepared by the SACOG staff. As I mentioned, we had limited time, limited information. We convened a peer review panel, and you have that attachment in your memo. But that's a SACOG.
Okay. There was some question around that because there was question about our MTP goal. I have a question about our MTP goals and targets and the assumption that these projects would be prioritized early on in the measure. I just wonder if everyone, including the proponents for the measure and SACOG staff, if all the attorneys looked at it, so we know the assumptions that were made regarding, when these projects could potentially be approved. In other words, I know from the county's point of view, they just put together a whole bunch of projects to be considered, knowing that this would be a long-term measure that, could potentially compete to be approved, not necessarily with the idea that those would be prioritized immediately or within the first 15 years, but that they would be, and not necessarily that those projects would be solely funded by that measure. Hopefully, in the past, we've always used Measure A to augment other opportunities for funding, for matching funds or whatever, to bring things to fruition. And so there might be, I'm saying there could be some assumptions in this report that that pigeonhole projects that we from the county, we don't want all those projects to be solely funded by STA necessarily. We want hopefully to maximize our efforts. That's what we're continually trying to do. So I guess my question is around those assumptions regarding, the projects and their funding and the timing and, and the bonding, up front or as it goes, how did that work? And were we in communication with, I guess, the proponents for this measure regarding, with their attorneys to say, what does that look like? And does this all have to be under SACOG? And why can't we as, a local Sacramento Transportation Authority board or a local city council or county board, say we definitely want this, but we're still regional partners. Why does it have to be stipulated in the measure? Can't there be other opportunities where we can, make sure that as we're moving forward over decades, staying in line with the plan that is updated regularly? And I kind of want to add to this the fact that I'm pretty sure, and I might be wrong because I've only been on SACOG few years, but I'm pretty sure we've never met our MTP SCS goals. I'm pretty sure we've never even come close. And so
you adopted an MTP SCS that meets the 19% greenhouse gas target in 2020. And that's again, that led to Green Means Go. It led to a lot of those things. So
that was goal setting, but we've never come close to actually meeting our goals. It seems like every time we come to an update, we didn't meet our goals on the last one, but we're exponentially increasing setting the bar higher and it's been hard. I think it's been hard and the SACOG staff have been amazing, but and I get what you're saying about the funding from the state. We want to definitely cooperate and be in line for that funding. So we're motivated on the local level and at the STA to do everything we can to position ourselves for that funding. So, even if it's not written down, I think at a local level at any time, we can say, we can say, we want to set up, we want to make sure we're doing this in a smart way and we're working closely with SACOG. So my question, that's my question. It seems like there's some assumptions made that this is the only, chance that we have to, make sure that we're excited about, our regional goals and working with them, but also at the same time maximizing our local authority to do things that we need in our local jurisdictions. And while, some of those projects in one area may not be the top project for another area, we all are working together to try to, help each other with our priorities locally. So anyway, I guess, I guess my question is, it comes back to, because there's assumptions made in the report that it seems like I don't know, I'm not on the team of the.
Can I answer that? Because can I answer that?
Who was at the table and did they have a chance to, have input on this?
So in the time we had, this analysis, think of it as a stress test, right? There's a whole bunch of assumptions that have to go into that stress. And that's what we had to do given the time we had. By the way, this was ready for you in April, and we held off on releasing it to the April board because we wanted these negotiations to continue. There's a lot of assumptions. We knew you'd have these questions. I know your staff, Director Frost, has raised a lot of questions, and that's fine. Our job was to show our work, which I think we've done in that very lengthy technical memo. And because I knew you would have these questions, is why we also convened a peer review panel. We're in touch with a lot of your staff. We did not do a big convening on this analysis because we felt like we had to get it done, and I wanted to get it done by April. But again, I'm happy to answer questions on the technical side. I'm sure, again, this is a stress test, right? This is a what if kind of a test. We feel good in the time we had that this is a very reasonable analysis. And we stand behind those findings and what it suggests and which way it points. And again, we're showed as much work as we can show in that whole technical memo in the attachment.
Okay,
I'll yield for now, Chair, and let others speak.
thank you. Okay, I'm gonna just start calling out names if it's okay with you guys, because I'm not quite certain of the order, and we'll move faster if I just do that. So we're gonna move to Elk Grove with Director Sun.
Thank you, Chair Jennings. I want to, couple of things I want to start off. There's several of us on here who served on STA. We worked on the 2020 measure. We believe we got to a point where we obtained agreement. Obviously, COVID prevented it from going on the ballot. And so here we are today, in some ways rehashing some things, and a lot of it goes to mitigation. And then as James pointed out, there's a lot of assumptions in this model, and there's a lot of assumptions, and I appreciate, James, the words you chose, because you stated risk and you stated potential, meaning the land use assumptions that are in these models that result from these projects really, can go one way or another. We also know that things have changed since COVID. There's telecommuting. We talked about EVs in the last conversation, but we really didn't talk about telecommuting. I have coworkers who no longer live in this area and go to work. So that is still forming the way what we know, what this new technology, how we're meeting right here today is still, forming. We don't have that information yet, and how it impacts the way people live and will work and travel. And so this study assumes a lot of things. It assumes a pre-COVID type of environment where people will, continue to just travel the way they've always been. And so I want to know on this, if you haven't dove into the technical memo yet, I hope you do, but there are these key assumptions. And if you look at the technical memo where the panelists even talk about, there's a lot of effort, months of effort that goes into determining how land use, how people, market absorption, where people buy homes and when they buy homes. All of that goes into these assumptions, this modeling, and can produce a result. And so we're talking about, again, debating the merits of mitigation on certain projects, and Mayor Steinberg mentioned the connector. But we're doing this before we've even gotten to ask the voters a question about funding. And so I would impress upon my colleagues here is that there's an opportunity for funding, and then there's mitigation of the projects. If we forego the opportunity to obtain funding, that is a decision that there's also inherent risk in that. And I would submit to you all that is a greater risk of hurting this region, not being able to do things that could invest in transit. As Hassan mentioned earlier, you can't make it unfair to the rider if you don't even have a completed system. And we in Sacramento County can't complete this system without funding. So the question that needs to be asked is whether or not it is important to have that funding. We still can debate mitigation, and Mayor Steinberg articulated some points here today that it sounds very promising, and I hope we can move forward. But the point is that conversation of mitigation can continue forward. Don't close the door on the opportunity to obtain funding for these projects that everyone in the county, in this region, needs if we're going to reduce greenhouse gas by improving our transit system, by providing pedestrian trails, by funding portions of this regional trail plan we just adopted. So there's risks. There's definitely risk both ways. So I hope my colleagues will consider that. I don't want to go too deep into this modeling, but only to say and emphasize to you, there are assumptions in this modeling that produce the results that they did. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that there's also assumptions that can affect that outcome. Thank you, Chair. I yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond just because I may not be able to stay, and I just want to make a point about Director Suin's comment.
Okay, I'll let you do that.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. First of all, I mean, the motivation for the mediation and the negotiation is manyfold. One is to make sure that the county plan both provides the funding that the director talked about, and is also at the same time is also consistent with the region's climate plan. But the other thing is that if this goes forward without a compromise, then it may pass and it may fail. I mean, but there will certainly be a lot of division and people lining up on different sides. And so we maximize the chance of passing this if we come together. And that's important. And then the last thing I just want to say, because I didn't get a chance to say it again, everybody has their own process and power in terms of timing of all of this. And by the way, the negotiations that we've had in my office from all the parties have been good, solid, good faith negotiations. If I had it my way, I wish I could just present this and the settlement be the focus, not the study. Because the study, by definition, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, will change, and it will change for the better if we make this a principled compromise. And that's what I think is the real opportunity here, to pass the measure, to provide the funding, to meet our climate imperative, to reduce congestion. We can do all of it. And this pathway that we have laid out here is the way to do it. And that's more important than an old fight, which is a fight about what happens if we don't.
Chair, can I just say, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say one quick thing if I can. Just on the, I know a lot of this, and Mayor Steinberg has mentioned the connector, and I'm sure folks here today will have comments. When I was talking about the bigger issues in play, I really want to make sure people understand this. The connector project, the middle segment of which is not in our long range plan for construction, one of the larger impacts of that is the unintended growth impacts that it will have in Eastern Sacramento County. And I've talked to many of you about this. Those are real. And Director Soon, when you said, the assumptions that are made, we don't know, those are actually very similar kinds of land use and growth assumptions that the connector itself uses in its own modeling. And so this is a real issue. This is a significant issue that, because we sometimes get a little wrapped around the axle on this. And I, like the mayor, believe there is a way forward on this, but the building of that project, the building of it quickly, and the potential to go from an inward to outward growth in this region to outward growth is real. It's very real. And so those assumptions, I think they are very well-informed assumptions that are in our analysis.
Just a quick response, James. I understand your point. All I'm saying is that's mitigation. The question before the voters is the funding.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask a point of order. Could we stop the?
Just a quick response. Thank you.
Okay, so let's go back to the order that I've determined. I'm going to bring up from Galt, Director Lozano, and then right after that from Marysville, Chris Branscombe.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to James and the SACOG staff for the work and bringing this forward to the board. And I understand this has been an issue that the SACOG staff has been trying to work on for almost over a year. And so I appreciate the opportunity and delaying this to see if we can come to some conclusion. Thank you, Mayor Steinberg, for your work on this as well. I just have really two quick questions, and I apologize if I missed something here. From what I understand, there is a question, at least in the compromise or the negotiations, about including part of the connector project within that's not currently in our MTPSCS and putting it in. Is there a mechanism in place to do that now? Or is that something that we would do in the future? And how would that affect the ballot?
I think as Mayor, if I can take a crack at this, Mayor Steinberg described, we would, as we've been talking about with the Proponents Initiative, we would analyze the connector in particular in a scenario in time for it in advance of the adoption of the 2024.
Understood. And my other couple of questions I had were already asked and answered, so I appreciate the time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Director Branscombe.
Thank you, Chair. This is a discussion item. Do we have members of the public in the queue to comment on this? I'm curious if any member of the three groups supporting this initiative is going to be involved in our conversation today. That would be a question. And that's based on the fact I got a call this morning from a representative of the Sacramento Regional Business Association, which is one of the three groups supporting this initiative. And he did not sound as conciliatory or as upbeat in terms of a compromise as the mayor did. And I'm not saying the mayor's wrong, it's another data point. And then the question, those are inputs. The question is, do we anticipate an action item on this matter at a future point? Thank you.
Thank you.
Potentially in June, Director Branscombe. Potentially.
And what about inputs from, I'd feel a lot more comfortable in terms of a breadth of understanding these issues if we had before us members of the groups supporting the initiative.
I think you may this morning, and if you don't, we could try to figure out how to arrange that, certainly in the June committee cycle, if we're at that point.
So what I'm hearing, James, is that through the committee process in June, this will be heavily discussed further than today. And we will also look at bringing in additional resources for those discussions, and then a decision at some point in time in the month of June as well.
That is my hope.
Okay, all right. So again, today is an information item. I mean, with a great opportunity to discuss. From the standpoint of this item, I'd like to hear from the directors first today. And then if there's public that wants to speak on it, I'd like to bring them in as well. But I really want to give you the opportunity because you may not be on the call, the whole call. You may have to leave early. And I'd like to hear from you before you leave.
Chair
So with
Jennings-
that,
Chair-
I already have somebody up, Director Frost.
I was wondering if I could just ask a question in relation to Director Branscom's comment regarding June.
Okay,
My understanding is they're already getting signatures on this, so they can't change it anyway. So what would the discussion in June go to? Or
James,
can-
James, are you familiar with it?
Kirk, you want to weigh in?
Yes, I can respond to that. It's a good question, Director Frost. There have been discussions about a settlement. There's a long way between the deal terms that have been talked about and actually finding a settlement that would have an impact on a citizens initiative measure. The ability to come back to the board with a deal will depend on those conversations and whether they can indeed affect the current language of the citizens measure.
Okay, all right. So let's go to Director Chenier and Director Saylor.
Chair, I was probably the last person to put my hand up. I'm willing to wait. Let's hear from others, if that's okay.
Director Saylor, I'm sorry, Saylor. And then Director Sander.
Well, I'll make a comment briefly, and I also want to hear from others. So I'm really couldn't be more comfortable that our SACOG staff have done an analysis of this measure as they saw it. It seems to me important that we have this kind of analysis before deal terms are structured, because this should be guiding how any kind of a regional plan should go forward. I think James's comment that our job is to show our work is entirely on point. And I'm not sure who these players are who are discussing our region's future around a table in an office that doesn't involve any of the members of this board or our staff in a significant way. So I'm concerned about transparency and about accountability. And I thought that one of the lessons I heard from our presenter from Sandag this morning was that a citizens initiative had been brought forward in their jurisdiction based on their MTP-SCS, based on their agreed upon regional plan for moving forward. I was chair of SACOG in 2015, and at that point we had a very strong interest from the Southeast Connector Coalition, the JPA, in advancing fairly similar sorts of things. We did arrive at a regional compromise on how to proceed to allow the connector to advance in the elements that were supportable in our MTP-SCS, and to have a longer tail for those that weren't supportable at that time. Perfectly reasonable that those elements that weren't included in the plan that we worked on in 2015 would come forward again. It's not reasonable that there be a gun to the head of the entire region that says you've got to include them in anything you do. I think it's got to be our strength as a region is that we come together as a team, as we either hang together or we hang separately. And the hang separately part of this is that if this analysis that we see it is in the ballpark for being accurate, I think we have to look at that. These are our professional staff, and they've consulted with others who are professionals and experts in this field. If that is correct, this would jeopardize our entire 6-county region for decades to come by undermining our ability to compete for federal and state funds. So I think we've got to look at what is it that we've agreed to. We've agreed that we want to have DEI. We've agreed, and that is compromised in this potential approach because it's not on the table. It's not being discussed. The lens that we've tried to say that we're going to include. I don't know that these things are all going to play out, but my goodness, we've got committees and we've got professional staff that we've got to be deploying when we've got something as significant as this for our region. This is not something we have a drive-by deal making going on that we are given a scarce verbal summary about. This has got to be for my comfort level, and I hope for the rest of our board, this is something we've got to take very seriously. This is our work. This is the future of our region and the legacy that we all leave. This is we can't simply take this in this fashion. So any suggestion that our SACOG staff should not have done this analysis or should not have shared it with us, I push back on extremely hard. I just don't buy that. I think we've got to have a little bit more process and accountability for us to make regional decisions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Saylor. Director Sander.
I just sort because Director Saylor, you just mentioned something, and I know there's a lot of information on the table in the discussion, right? You mentioned a sort of a room and a table, Director Saylor. I do want to assure you all that we have been in good faith negotiations for about 6 weeks, as Mayor Steinberg said. So we have been talking with proponents of the initiative. Mayor has been doing a great job facilitating. So if that was the room you're referencing, I want to make sure you understand we're in there, but I also, I feel as, I guess, hopeful, maybe as the mayor does, but there is a ways to go.
Director Sander.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a really important discussion, and I think politically, most of us sitting around here, particularly in Sacramento County, understand how important this is. There is no way to meet our transportation funding needs without this measure in any reasonable amount of time. I have not served on STA, but we have seen STA try and fail, try and be unable to complete, or try and be advised not to try to complete a process that required a 2/3 vote. This is fundamentally different. This is a citizens initiative that's taking advantage of probably what many could assume is a current loophole in state law that allows initiatives like this to pass and assess a tax assessment for transportation purposes at a 50% level instead of 2/3. And there is a massive world of difference between those two numbers, as we know. There is literally no other way to do this otherwise. This is a one-shot deal that we've got because that loophole is likely to close. And I guess I need to emphasize, this is a citizens initiative, not being run by SACOG, not being run by any government agency. It's a partnership of residents, business, labor, transit advocates. It's not us. We're on the sidelines. Our job, as Mr. Saylor just suggested, could be to advise and to keep score, but we can't determine what's in that. That's a citizens initiative. So there are ongoing negotiations, and STA is going to eventually be the recipient of these funds if it's successful, which I think it will be almost regardless of how SACOG acts. STA will be the recipients of that, and all sorts of possibilities are there to resolve whatever conflict exists here, but there are a lot of conflicts. We do have the study in front of us today as an information item. I guess I've got some very serious questions about it. One of which is a fundamental assumption made in the study that a 40-year plus expenditure plan would all be completed by 2035, which of course is impossible and not reasonable. And that therefore that's the impact we have to look at for 2035 that resulted in that percentage of GHG impact. The reviewers also looked at that, called it out as, well, that is what it is, and didn't offer an alternative. But in no reasonable world does everything planned over 40 years get built in the next 12. That is not a reasonable assumption. So I don't know what this study actually shows based on that. That seems to be a fatal error in my view. Many people today have talked about benefits versus risk, and that certainly is the question here. And this really boils down to a land use debate. I noticed in the opening paragraph of the study that SACOG is self-describing itself as the region's approval body for land use plans. I think that's like an agency level Freudian slip, if I'm not mistaken. All of us, I think, take our independence and our own land use very, very seriously as individual agencies. And it is not the case that SACOG is the regional land use approval body. And that may be the crux of the debate that has caused this consternation that's appeared in front of us here today. But there are a lot of weird things in this math. You know, I see those graphics that popped up. Those of us in Sacramento County could probably look at them, look to see what the impacts were on our jurisdictions. And, you know, in my city, to say that construction of a portion of a road here or some transit addition here is going to lead to this particular new growth or have this impact is frankly laughable. Now, I understand statewide, we live in this world of models, and all these MTP, STS, SES plans have to go through these models, but sometimes on their face, the model is kind of ridiculous. And I could certainly point to examples like that in my jurisdiction. You can probably point to them in yours too, but we are stuck in that world, unfortunately. There are other issues that we're not allowed to consider, you know, in terms of greenhouse gas reduction. We're not allowed to consider that our fleet is becoming more and more electric, therefore emitting less and less greenhouse gas. That's not an allowed assumption under any sort of planning under current state law. That, you know, is not terribly logical either. So I don't know if we ever get a reality check, if we ever get back to sort of a reasonable basis of science in predicting these things. We're more in a political process here than a scientific one. But again, the stakes here are enormously high. There is no other alternative in this measure. We do not control the measure. That's an independent group. My strong advice is to find a solution, dealing with the applicants, as Director Branscombe has suggested, not applicants, dealing with proponents of the measure. And perhaps what Mayor Steinberg has lined out will work, perhaps something else will. But let's not fool ourselves that we somehow have the veto authority or all the knowledge about exactly how this plays out.
Sandra, can I just quickly respond to a couple of things you said, because I think they're important. One is we have to make a lot of assumptions. Absolutely. We are not assuming the whole measure. The whole measure over 40 years comes into the long range plan. We looked at the larger projects, several of which there's talk about bonding against. So it isn't the whole measure, it's the larger ones that are bonded and accelerated. That's an assumption. And again, we showed our work on that, okay?
Just the capacity enhancing ones, I think, James, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
So it's a stress test, like I said. The second is I know this sends a chill among many of you. I just want to, unless I'm missing something, we say the agency responsible for approving the region's long-range transportation and land use plan, and that is what we are. So if there's an issue on that, and if there is something else that you mentioned, that I'm happy to talk to you offline, because you have the land use authority, but this agency has the approval authority of a growth and a transportation plan that is not a wish list, it's a strategic plan, right? And that is unassailable.
You good? Okay, I've got Director Desmond and then Director Burris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciated the conversation. I have a lot of the same concerns that Director Sander brought up, certainly, and James, I will tell you, I very much appreciate your efforts to keep me in the loop, and I know all the directors in the loop about what was going on. I joined, Darrell Steinberg and his hopes that this study will become irrelevant because we'll be able to work out some kind of deal with the proponents. My concern is, and James, you and I had the discussion yesterday, that my worry is that this is going to have the exact opposite effect of that. And you told me why you were really kind of under the gun to get this out. This was the last chance to get this out, and I understand that as well. So this is a difficult thing. I think that I had some of the same questions that Director Kozlowski had in terms of just the mechanics that you cite. And by the way, I know this is informational, but the problem is this is really putting a message out there to the public about this initiative. And not everybody shares that same concern, or they may have a little bit different interpretation about it. So in terms of the mechanics that you talked about with Director Kozlowski, maybe James, you can help break this down to me a little bit, and forgive me because I'm also a new person here on on the SACOG board, and wasn't here in 2020 when these discussions were going on. But it seems to me on the mechanics, a project must meet, either it complies with our GHG emission standards, and if it doesn't comply, then it has to be mitigated. And if it can't be, the impacts have to be mitigated. If the impacts can't be mitigated, then the funding for that project has to go into another project that is consistent with the MTP. Is that roughly accurate, James?
Dr. Desmond, are you talking about the language that is currently in the initiative that's circulated?
Yes.
I might ask Kirk to jump in here on this because we work
Yeah.
so similar. Go ahead, Kirk.
Director Desmond, in the language that was compromised in 2020 was that the projects would have to be included in the MTP SCS. And that language was deleted from this measure. And certainly the board should ask the question, why was that language deleted? And what the current measure does is it leaves to the project proponents the ability to decide whether they think their impacts of their projects have been mitigated. And we're not talking about just the connector, we're talking about 26 capacity projects and potentially over 70 capacity projects, where project proponents would be able to go on their own, make their own determination, and never consult with or ensure that the projects are actually in our plan. That's the difference that is unexplained and was made to the new language.
And is the new language specific that the project proponents determine that, Kirk, or would that be STA determining that?
It's the project proponent.
And that's the language in the 2022 measure.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the final comment I just want to make is that I hope that this doesn't have that impact, James, in terms of hindering our continued negotiations, because for my part, I agree with Director Soon, Director Sander about the importance that the public gets to decide. The public, the taxpayers in Sacramento County get to decide on this measure because it is crucial in terms of our transportation needs in Sacramento County. So I would just encourage you and the negotiating team to keep working very hard to work out some kind of compromise. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Burris.
Thank you. You know, as one of the smallest cities, if not the smallest city in our region, you know, I know we're not quite the smallest, but we're pretty dang small. We don't get a lot of a voice all the time on issues like this that impact us and impact our neighbors, impact our region. And SACOG is one of those platforms that gives us the ability to make sure that our backs are covered and that we are considered in things that affect us. And I feel like it's been painted on this call by a few people that SACOG is the entity preventing this measure from going forward. And I don't feel like that's a fair characterization of the efforts that have been made by our staff. I feel like they have really taken a very serious look at what their job is and what the potential impacts of these changes are. And they have done their due diligence to try to inform us and make sure that we are making a decision based on all the information that we can have available to us to support our decisions. And, you know, the voters aren't always privileged to that level of detail. You know, they don't always have time to sit down and read an 80-page document they received 2 days before having to make a decision. That's our job. And I'm not aware of anybody on this call who's willing to, you know, wishfully prevent sustainable, constructive funding opportunities from coming to fruition. But when we come to this table to represent the region as a whole and the risks associated with changes in language like this, it's very real. And I have a hard time, you know, with those risks being minimized several times on this call. And the risks, again, they're real, they're important, and the funding is real and important. But so is good policy making for the sake of ensuring good implementation and good future governance. You know, we're a diverse region. We cannot, in the scope of this conversation, silo ourselves into local jurisdictions without, you know, being aware of our impacts of our actions on each other. We win as a team or we lose as a team. The language change from 2020 measure is significant potential to harm the other areas in our region. And I don't see any reason why our directors would be comfortable cutting SACOG from having oversight capability that, you know, was previously negotiated in good faith. So I would encourage SACOG to continue negotiations. We don't want to see this measure fall through. I would love to see it go through. I'd love to see, you know, the continued growth, Again, being a diverse region, we are very interdependent on each other for our different capabilities, our different aspects. But I feel like SACOG staff is doing the right thing by pushing back and, taking a stand on something that they believe is wrong, and trying to make sure that in good faith, they have protected everybody within the region. So I want to thank our staff for their hard work, and thank you for continuing to negotiate.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, we will now go to Director Chenier. You should be ready now, and Director Baines will follow after you. Then we have new directors, Wendy Thomas and Bonnie Gore. And coming back for a second bite at the apple, Director Kolosky and Director Saragosa.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it. Just a few things, and as many have noted, this is an incredibly significant discussion that we're having, which will impact decades of our work in the region, and we need to get this right. I want to start by thanking our staff at SACOG, James, Kirk, and all the folks who worked on the analysis. I think it's incredibly difficult, the timeframes on doing it, the politics surrounding all this, but it's really about making sure that we have as much of the facts as humanly possible before us as we have the discussions. So James and Kirk and others, thank you for that. And I also want to thank Mayor Steinberg for doing everything humanly possible to find a pathway to get to a place where this goes on the ballot and passes. I think that the sequencing is really important. It will get on the ballot, as Director Sanders said. This is a citizens initiative, but there are political forces certainly on both sides of this that will be activated depending on what final language looks like in the initiative, and then in some accompanying document, which would be hopefully the result of negotiations and a compromise to do this. I want nothing more than to see public transit get the funds it needs to move ahead. I want nothing more than to see that our cities and county have the funds that they need to repair our roads, which are in complete disarray. What that is going to require is that we find that middle line. Because frankly, I think that if we don't, this will not pass because there will be objection to it. And just to lay it out, when we look at polling from around the state, tax increases are not very popular right now, even a 50% plus one. So I think that it's incredibly important that we all get on the same page. There's no question this has been messy, and I've been involved a little bit here and there, had discussions in the December, January timeframe and some more recently. We are at the precipice of doing something great for our region or for the county within this and our transportation system. And we have to come together around this. This is not about a single road. This is really about how we make these decisions larger decisions. And Kirk talking about the 26 projects or the possibly 70 projects. We have to have a mitigation strategy, and it has to be sequenced that comes before a final decision. We can't bet on the come and say a mitigation strategy will come later and we'll figure it out together. And frankly, we can't have the folks who are proponents of any project deciding on their own mitigation strategy and certifying that it's enough. That's what SACOG's job is. That's what they've always done. I think when you look back, and Mr. Saylor was talking about the agreement that was made that allowed the 2 nodes of the connector to be built. I don't think SACOG is against the project. I think what they need to do is their job, which is telling us what we need to know to do our jobs, and do that independent analysis and do it transparently and do it in an open process, so that when people have discussions about, and the peer review on this was incredibly important, and want to have that discussion. So my hope is that we continue these discussions, that the mayor, the mayor and the advocates on all sides here get together and do something that's right for our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Baines.
Yes, thank you, Chair Jennings. I just want to thank James and the staff. Once again, I understand at this point, this is it's just an information item, but I don't know how you all can expect us to support such an initiative. We started off talking about the benefits versus the risk. That I'm a team player, but I can't agree with Mr. Saylor and Mayor Burris more. That you know, I mean, I don't see the benefits that this would bring to our region, and actually looking into the future, that we'll lose out a lot of opportunities when it comes to state and federal funds, and that, you know, these funds got to come from somewhere. And I mean, I just think that you know, I would wish he has continue to negotiate and hope to find some kind of common ground. But I you know, I thank staff and James for this report, and we'll see what happens at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Baines. We will move to Wendy Thomas and Director Gore.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everyone's willing to work on a compromise, and I certainly understand the great desire to secure transportation funding for the Sacramento region, and I support that. Director Saragosa and I were instrumental in getting the sales tax initiative passed for the city of Placerville, which was a game changer. So I understand the impact of that. That said, I think it's important for us to start to consider perhaps the proposed compromise that Mayor Steinberg laid out. We haven't addressed that at all, and you know, look forward to hearing James and our staff's thoughts on that. And maybe I misunderstood that, but I am concerned that potentially the suggested compromise lays the success of mitigating the connector after it's built on SACOG. And I find that a little problematic, or actually very problematic, when the projects in the initiative are not integrated into our regional plan and potentially really dramatically shift our land use policy. So I think those are very important discussions that I'm sure will be in earnest in the weeks ahead. And just like Director Burris, who I think you articulated the challenge extremely well, that any compromise obviously must not threaten our ability to garner state and federal funds for our entire region. That has to be an absolute hard line. And I just wish everyone at the table well in finding a compromise and a path forward.
Thank you very much, Director Thomas. Director Gore.
Thank you. I will be brief. I really appreciate the conversation. I agree, the folks in Sacramento, I certainly understand your need for this funding mechanism and want for you to be successful in that. And I think what's really important is the concern about the other 5 counties and our jurisdictions that could be negatively affected by this if we, as a region, end up losing state and federal dollars. And so I want to share that perspective with the proponents of the initiative. I want you all to be successful. I also request that you all hear that it's important for the rest of the jurisdictions, because if projects go forward and it hinders the ability of Placer County or Yolo County to receive funds in the future, then that's a real problem. And it's a real problem because we're working together as a region. So I just strongly request in these negotiations, you all work to find a solution that benefits Sacramento and your jurisdictions, as well as keeps in mind that it's really important for the rest of our region to be able to have access to state and federal dollars. So I am hopeful that you can get to an agreement. But I just want to encourage you that this is a project that ultimately would affect all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will go back to Director Saragosa and Director Kolowski.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a few comments, and I won't belabor in a lot of the comments of my fellow colleagues from Placer County, El Dorado County, other counties. Certainly, we don't want to see anything that's going to put funding at risk for the outlying counties. And it was a little discouraging to hear, about Sacramento County and the word regional being left out of some of the comments of obviously of folks that are in support of the current language, or at least the sales tax measure. You know, I want to be able to think about this as a regional project still. And I'll go back to our, you know, our REI conversations, and knowing that, you know, I might very well lose out, you know, for Placerville on a project, because maybe, you know, South Sacramento is going to get something, you know, when it comes down to the final numbers on an REI type project. And that's something that we've taken a great leap forward on, just, you know, and that may happen. And so I want everybody to look back and think about that as we go forward and talk about this as a region. And just pragmatically, and I think Jay brought this up, and I appreciate him saying that, is, you know, 50+1 is no automatic. We looked at the last election cycle. This is what I do for a living. You know, we look back at the last election cycle, and, you know, we saw tons of measures go down, from school board initiatives to statewide measures that people thought were sort of an easy pass. And that was before we had 8% plus inflation. So, you know, I wouldn't take anything for granted, and to the extent that we can come to an agreement, I think it's much more likely that if even a 50+1 has a chance to pass. I mean, we lost a 50+1 measure in Placerville, and when we thought that would be a slam dunk, and we were able to pass it a 2/3 measure when we focused it. So again, it's not the end all be all, just from a pragmatic perspective as well. And you can look, I can show plenty of polling that would lead to that as well. So again, I hope we can get to a compromise. I'm certainly willing to, you know, volunteer my time if I can be of any help bridging the gap. And again, I want to thank the mayor, but I also do think we should have SACOG in the room at that. I know staff is, but I like to see you know, somebody from the board also be into those negotiations as well. Thank you.
Director Kulowski.
Yeah, at the risk of stating the obvious, we've been hammering away at this, and it boils down to two quick things. One is that economic development, which we all pursue zealously as representative of our particular jurisdictions, eventually bumps up against environmental protection. And that's what we're talking about here. So, and we've spent, you know, most of the last 2 years as a board talking about the Green Mean Scope program, which was developed specifically to close a gap that we thought existed in the MTP-SES, that the state hadn't provided funding to help us get there. So ultimately, this is a question of getting the right kind of funding in the right control so that we can mitigate whatever the negative effects might be of these projects. And then I will also second what Director Saragosa said. I think there should be somebody or a couple of somebodies from our board in the remainder of any discussions that we have with these projects, with the initiative sponsors, just to make sure that a broader set of perspectives is added to that discussion. I don't want to complicate it, but there's somebody should be involved. And then to Director Sanders' comments earlier, I think he was right on the money all the way through. I think that the critique of using kind of the worst case as a possible outcome isn't necessarily a bad thing in terms of accelerating all of the development that's expected over a 40-year period into a 20-year period. It's very unlikely, but it should be characterized as a worst case very carefully if we go forward with any revisions to this report. And then lastly, I will just say, just one, I think it's a question. The question I was getting at earlier, and maybe this is for a little bit more clarification on what Director Desmond asked and Kirk tried to answer, is the project sponsors, as things stand right now, would be the ones that would be responsible for CEQA, for any project that they're putting forward, and mitigating any negative effects from their project, not the proponents of the ballot measure. Am I correct in that? So if one of the projects is actually something that Caltrans is going to do, it would fall on Caltrans to do CEQA, be the agency, and mitigate whatever the negative effects are. Or if it's the connector project, it would be the connector JPA. So not literally the project sponsor, the ballot measure proponents.
That's correct, Director Kozlowski. It's the project sponsors. That is the Caltrans or whatever jurisdiction is proposing a capacity project. But the important thing that it does is it gives them the ability to make the determination about whether it's consistent with the region meeting its greenhouse gas target. It carves SACOG's role completely out of the process.
That may be the case, but it doesn't change the fact that they need to comply with California law as it relates to analyzing and mitigating those types of things, right?
With respect to CEQA, correct, but not with respect to SACOG's role in determining compliance with the regional greenhouse gas targets. And that's a big difference. They have responsibility under CEQA to mitigate their individual project impacts. You have a broader role with respect to what happens in the region and the greenhouse gas target.
Okay, but the worst case that we're describing here is also one where every one of those project sponsor public agencies act both irrationally and irresponsibly and do not mitigate for the projects that they're particularly pushing forward.
Well, that's a great question. And it really goes back to Director Frost's question. Director Frost said, well, we're going to work with the region anyway. And I think our response is, yeah, and we expect most jurisdictions to work with SACOG to reasonably bring their projects to the regional planning process. I think the question I asked is, why is the position now that language should not be included in the measure like it was included in 2020? There was obviously a specific intent to take that language out. And as long as Director Frost suggested, everyone is prepared to work with SACOG to work as 28 jurisdictions together to ensure we've considered all the impacts, then we're going to be fine as a region. The question is the deletion of that language an attempt to avoid that requirement in the future?
Okay. Well, I would suggest that there are plenty of instances in the world where we have too much language in initiatives, and simplifying them can sometimes be a net improvement. So I don't know that that's the case here, but listen, my deeply jaded side of me remains overwhelmed by the optimistic side of me, and I believe fully that there is a path forward here. And I'm happy to help in any way that I can to see us to that result. Thank you.
Okay. Director Guerrero.
Thank you. I think everybody's hit most of the important points. We are all excited for opportunities for any of the folks in our jurisdiction to have an opportunity to make a change like this, but it has to be something that's included in, and that's why SACOG is here, so that we all have that voice to make sure it is not at the expense of someone else. And this is not ready. It's clearly, I'm hoping that they're hearing our message today about the language that we need to be in there. And I also support, by the way, Mayor Burris did such a fabulous job. Go Colfax. I thought you explained it very, very well. But I also think it's important that someone be involved in the overseeing process or the approval process other than the proponent or the contractor. And hopefully we have representation, I think, in these conversations before it comes back to us makes perfect sense. I think SACOG needs to be represented. So hopefully they're hearing this message, and we have to have a voice.
Thank you very much.
That's why we're here, right? That's why we created SACOG.
Jill, you had your hand up. You wanted to go ahead and take the next point? Director Gale?
Oh, sorry, yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you so much, Chair Jennings. I wanted to share some thoughts about this as well. I initially heard about this from this report from the proponents, gathered that there was a serious report coming out. But more important for me was the impact of SACOG not being included to be able to assess the greenhouse gas emissions and as a group. And that for me was my focus as I looked at the ballot initiative. The additional, information that came out from the report is like Mayor Steinberg said, I think is something that, yes, we need to take a look at, but more importantly, as we move forward, and I'm appreciative to hear that we could still have an impact on the language, is to ensure that SACOG remains a key contributor to that assessment. For West Sacramento, Green Means Go, as you've seen, what the positive impact it has is been a contributor, and we'd like to continue to grow in that manner. We've been a recipient of the federal funding, and that is still a priority. We have budget asks in the pipeline. And so, if there are consequences as a result of passage of this ballot initiative, that it will be a concern to my council. But I'm also mindful of the fact that we do need additional funding, and Sacramento is putting forward a recommendation to put this ballot initiative back out again for a vote, and trying to secure funding. It's an area that we share a boundary, and we want that to see them successful as well. However, we want to also make sure that as a region, which is where we've been working together all these years, collaboratively, that we maintain, being able to work together on meeting the targeted goals, and also, contributing to the negotiations of what is finally included in the front end, rather than working it out later on in the process. I think that's important. I always believe that you should have everything laid out, especially for the voters who are considering a vote on this. You want to be transparent on the process, and I think voters appreciate accountability. And so, if there are, and climate, changes, that we're being impacted by the, significant number of fires and random, weather patterns that we are experiencing. So, I'm seeing that voters are mindful of those things today. So I think, improving the transparency and accountability measures with an organization that has been focused on that among all of us who work together, I think is incredibly important, for the successful passage of the ballot initiative. So in that level of collaboration, I think, is important for this. So I do agree with a lot of comments said by my colleagues, and like to see, us being able to work together, and hopeful that, this report, as I've also heard from the proponents, the release of it has impacted negotiations, does not impact negotiations. And we can continue to work together to achieve, some level of oversight on what is to come in the future as it relates to our region in the language of the ballot initiative. So just want to say thank you to those who are vigilant and moving this forward, and also to SACOG for putting the work and the effort to keeping us informed. I value your input and value the work that's been done, and looking forward to what happens in June. I think there is much more than the report that I'd like to see accomplished. I heard that the report will be back, but if there's a way to keep us informed on a regular basis other than waiting until June, I would appreciate that. That way we have a sense as to, whether we need to do our part to contribute to having an impact on that negotiation, instead of waiting to hear at a meeting where, there's some finality, and I don't want to see us finding ourselves in a position where we can't negotiate anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Foss, you took your hand down?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to a couple of the members who I may not have spoken clearly, but I think to my point, it was that this is a citizens initiative. I wasn't involved in those conversations. It's my understanding that there have been conversations over time. This has already gone out for signatures, so I don't know how much can be changed, but I think my point that I wanted to make, my understanding is today we're not taking a position, but I think we're all motivated regionally to do good things and to work together. And we're also in each of our jurisdictions trying to solve problems and bring good things to life. And so, at the end of the day, I think if this passes, which it probably will, and I don't even know if I'm going to support it, but this is, for me, the important part for me is that, we have this opportunity for citizens to come forward with an initiative and make something happen in their local jurisdiction. And at the end of the day, all of us are serving on those other boards and making decisions that can create policy or protocol that cooperates in a good way with our regional goals and positions us for funding. I think we're all motivated to do that, and I'm motivated to do that. So if you're disappointed, don't be disappointed. I want to be a regional player. I also was concerned that maybe there were some misunderstandings, or there was another side of the story that we didn't get the whole story, that because I wasn't in those conversations, but I too heard that there wasn't time maybe to get have a complete analysis of what was intended in that policy that was written. So I think what I want to say is I look forward to hopefully, I'm hoping SACOG's not gonna, I don't know what your intention is in June, James, to come back with or Mayor Steinberg, are we intending to take a position on this? Because it was my understanding from my conversation with you that
No.
SACOG was not going to take a position. So you were just wanting to have this conversation in a transparent way.
Correct.
Thank you.
So, as your chair, it does my heart good to hear this level of discussion on a subject of this magnitude. I kept track of how many people actually talked, and we had a large majority of our directors speak out on this matter, and I know others will do so in the days ahead. I heard conversation about this being the future of our region and how significant it is for our region. I heard conversations about, and I heard James say this, that he's 100% committed to finding a solution. And I heard in the voice of everybody that was speaking that you're committed and right there by his side in helping to find a solution. Golden One has a logo that says we're stronger together. And we are. We are stronger together. We are stronger in our understanding. We are stronger in our work. We are stronger in our ability to strategize and find solutions for our region. And what I ask from all of us is to keep an open mind, make sure that whatever strategy we put in place, that there be nothing that can threaten the state and federal funding that comes into our jurisdiction. That we all have great thoughts, and all great thoughts and all great ideas are invited to come to the table. If you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you have a great idea and a great thought, call James. Don't call me, call James Corliss. No, I'm joking with you on that one. You call me anytime you want. I'd love to hear from you. But if you got a great thought, a great idea, something that you think you can add to the party, please call and let us know what it is that you're thinking. And I was really happy to see those of you who said, I'd be happy to help. And I know many of you may not have said it, but I know you have the happy to help mentality. We're all here ready to step up wherever we are needed. So I want to thank the mayor for his role in doing what he's doing and the amount of time that he's put into it. I mean, he's been incredible. But I also want to thank our leader and CEO, James Corliss, who has put in an equal amount of work and is working tirelessly on our behalf to make sure that we have the best region moving forward. And so, James, I just really appreciate you and your guidance for me. I'm one that I need better understanding. I need to gain better understanding. This meeting has helped me to gain better understanding. Each one of you has helped me to gain better understanding. And with my better understanding, I'll be able to work together with you to move our region forward. And so I thank you for that. Thank you, James, for helping me. Thank you, James, for helping all of us. I know it took a lot for you to get that analysis out, and you waited as long as you could to get it out. But I appreciate the fact that you got it out and you gave us time to be able to go through it before this meeting today. So I say to all of us, keep an open mind, keep bringing those great thoughts, those great ideas, that happy to help mentality, gain better understanding to all of this. And when it's all said and done, if you got some great ideas and thoughts that you want to put on the table, please call and let us know. Our next time that we'll have the opportunity to discuss this in greater detail will be at the committee structure. We have meetings on Thursday, June the 2nd, and we have committee meetings on Monday, June the 6th. And I've already heard from a couple of the chairs that said they are looking forward to leading this discussion in the committee meetings. Again, this will be opportunity to have better understanding and better discussion as we get more information about each one of these. And
Chair
so we
Jennings?
will, yes, please.
I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt what I always, I want to make sure you understand we've got public comment.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna do that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish on the note that there's another opportunity for each one of us as directors to engage in more conversation, more understanding, more knowledge, more strategy. And then we will go to public conversation at this time.
Chair Jennings, I have 2 written comments that I can read into the record. And additionally, we have some members of the public participating in the meeting who have their hand raised. Which comments would you like to take first?
Let's take the members from the public. It's that they may have been waiting for a while, and we can always take the written comments at the end.
Okay, sure. So with their hand raised first, we have Dan Allison with STAR, STAR. And Mr. Allison, if you're there, we're ready for your public comment.
Thank you. This is Dan Allison. I'm with Sacramento Transit Advocates and Riders. That's what STAR stands for. 2 comments. One is that I believe this analysis is critically important. It is the major missing piece from whether this measure is a good measure or not. The removal of the language shows a clear intent on behalf of the proponents to bypass SACOG and to bypass regional input. And it's interesting that there's been 6 weeks of negotiation with the proponents, but so far as I know, no discussion with the opponents. I know that the majority of the transit, transportation, and environmental advocacy organizations in Sacramento County are already opposed to the measure. I heard several people say, well, we need to bring the proponents to a meeting and hear from them. If you bring proponents to the meeting without hearing from the opponents, we will be extremely upset. Our voice has been suppressed in many situations, and we're tired of this. Negotiation behind closed doors doesn't work for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment is from Mike McKeever. Mike, good to see you. You're welcome to provide your comment as soon as you're ready.
Good morning. Many of you may not know, I retired as the CEO of SACOG over 5.5 years ago. I filled that job for 12 years, and 3 years prior to that, I was the blueprint manager for the organization. I have stayed away directly of involving myself in SACOG since then, but this issue is of such importance. I appreciate a couple of minutes to share some thoughts. First, to the point of keeping things simple, which I very much support. I think you should keep in mind that in 2020, there was very simple language negotiated around this issue. And that measure that didn't make it to the ballot because the 2/3 vote requirement simply said projects that are going to be funded need to be in the SACOG board's adopted MTP SCS that meets the target, and provided a means that if in any projects that never turned out to be possible, to redirect the funds to other projects under the control of the local jurisdictions who would have benefited, but still with the stricture that it be in the plan. And I just have to ask the question, why is that simple language no longer adequate to resolve this issue? It's pretty clear from state law on funding, and I think this affects some federal competitive funding as well, that transportation funds to the entire region are at risk if you ever get in a position of adopting a regional plan that fails to meet the state's greenhouse gas target. It's your option to do that, but there are consequences now for that. So I would just encourage you to keep that in mind. I know when I had James's difficult job, I worried about a lot of things in trying to keep all 31 of my bosses happy, but priorities 1, 2, and 3 were always keep the transportation funds flowing. If I ever saw anything going on at the federal state level that would be a threat to your ability to bring transportation money home to serve your residents and businesses, it was my duty to warn you of that threat. And I think the SACOG staff report is excellent and is consistent with the high technical standards that's the reputation that SACOG has built over the last 2 years of being a national leader for the best quality technical work. I am very familiar with the strictures that come from the federal government, both DOT and EPA, and the state government, Caltrans, and the California Air Resources Board, that monitor the technical analysis and data that the MPOs all around the country must use to demonstrate compliance with the Federal Clean Air Act, and in this case, Senate Bill 375. The work that your staff does at SACOG is the best in the country at keeping those federal and state regulatory agencies believing that they're getting the best information possible. And so it's only natural and reasonable that people have questions when you're making long-term forecasts and you're allocating land use. And so in some way, I understand some of the doubts and questions that have been raised. But this, again, to end on the issue of simplicity, the central issue in the technical analysis is, will adding transportation capacity on the edge of the region incentivize changes to the land use pattern and encourage more development, especially housing, to occur in the outer areas instead of the inner areas? That is just based on both common sense and literally decades of empirical data that proves that that cause and effect relationship exists. Maybe the map that the SACOG produced in the amount of time that they had to do at a parcel level doesn't look exactly right to some of you, but the basic conclusion that building transportation on the edge of a region will incentivize sprawl development is just a fact. And in fact, state and federal law requires SACOG to do that analysis before their plan would ever be approved by those entities and allow the transportation money to flow and the finding that the Clean Air Act requirements are met. So don't make the forest for the trees mistake in looking too close at the details. And in close on that, I would just say, remember what your CEO told you, that the connector proponents themselves have their own technical analysis regarding the land use impacts of building that transportation facility. It's been in the public record for years, and it reaches the exact same conclusion, that there will be many houses that are brought to the edge of the region instead of being built in the infill areas. It's the reason, by the way, that that their own transportation consultants make the conclusion that building that road will reduce congestion. Well, the reason it's congested is that when you build it, it incentivizes land use to move to the edge. And then you have a whole bunch more cars traveling that route than will be traveling it if you build the land use pattern that is in your approved plan. So just inclusion, I really want to compliment your chair, Jennings, and his citing the better together, saying at the end, SACOG is better when you're together. And many of you in Sacramento County who are supporting this initiative have heard your friends and colleagues from other parts of the region understandably be worried that they have a risk if this initiative goes forward. And so I would encourage you, in addition to keeping the pressure on your staff to be good faith in their negotiations, put some pressure on the project proponents to do the same thing. Why can't they live with the language that was agreed to 2 years ago? That would come awfully close to resolving this conflict. Thank you very much for your time.
Chair Jennings, I don't see any other members of the public with their hand raised. Would you like me to go ahead and read the comments, the written comments into the record? Chair Jennings, I'm going to take that as yes.
The answer is yes. I thought I was off mute. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. So our first comment is from Barbara Stanton, the Director of Ridership for the Masses Group. She says Ridership for the Masses does not support the 2022 Measure A initiative for the following reason. No increase of funds for senior and disabled transportation over the life of the measure. In the current Measure A, provisions were made for the percent to increase over the life of the measure. It started at around 3% and is currently 4.5% and will continue to increase until sunset. In the 2022 measure, the provision for senior and disabled transportation is 3.09%, decreasing the current percentage back with no provision for increases. The senior population of Sacramento County is predicted to rise within the life of the new measure to 158% for seniors over 65 and more percent for seniors over 85. No public participation was provided for the 2022 Measure A to advocate on behalf of this issue. Thank you for your time and consideration of our email. The second public comment that I received is from Ann Stausbull. She says, my name is Ann Stausbull and I chaired the Mayor's Climate Commission for Sacramento and West Sacramento. Your staff has raised very real risks if this initiative were to pass about the ability to meet the region's greenhouse gas reduction goals, land use growth patterns, and the ability to obtain critical state and federal funding. Furthermore, studies show that building new highways may reduce traffic congestion in the short term, but in the long term only increases traffic and congestion. This is a self-serving developer-led initiative that could have disastrous impacts on our air quality and the future of our youth. Please take this seriously and do not take a myopic approach to our mobility needs for the future. Thank you. And that concludes the written comments. And in the, oh, sorry, no, they put their hand down. That concludes all of the public comment that I've received thus far.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, that concludes the SACOG review and analysis of the proposed Citizens Transportation Tax Initiative. We will have more discussions, as I said earlier, at our committee process, and then ultimately at our board meeting, I would imagine at that point in time, move to action. Is that correct, James?
Correct.
Cool. Okay, we did not.
Do you mind? I know we're late.
Go ahead.
I'll be brief. I know Mr. Director Kozlowski's laughing at me as he should. Okay.
I was gonna move to table item 11.
Well, I have some direction on table 11 I'd like to give you.
I'll be quick. I think this discussion this morning is exactly where you should be as a board. And I will just say, I think between Chair Gore from last year and your leadership, Chair Jennings, this board has built itself, you all as members, into the place you were this morning to have this discussion. I know this isn't easy. I know it's controversial and challenging, and it is not my job to shy away from those things, as you heard from our workshop presenter. So I was, and there are really good comments that were made, excellent comments. I do want to, people have mentioned staff, and I know I knew there would be a lot of doubts and holes poked in the analysis. And as I said, we try to show our work, and we convene that peer review panel. As you have heard this morning, our staff is fantastic. And that technical analysis, all the assumptions therein, laid out to you in the attachments, it is an example of why this is a great agency and why this is a great region. And we're very lucky to have them. I just want to thank many, many people who worked on that and dropped other things they were doing to do it. And finally, I just want to say, and maybe this is now clear to all of you, but I know that a lot of people wanted us to hold this memo and just keep holding it. But I don't think, I think June is your last chance to really discuss some sort of a solution. I believe that 100%. And given this conversation this morning, I don't think we could have brought this issue to you in June and have you actually sign off on something in June. That was my call. Regardless of what you will hear about us walking away from negotiations, that was my call. And I think it's the right one. I stand by it, because you have to understand this, right, in order to figure out a solution. And we will, you got my commitment 100% to work towards that. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. So on item number 11, what I'd like you to do is, it was an information item today. I'd like you to direct all questions, comments, and thoughts regarding that item to General Counsel Kurt Trost. And then we'll have the opportunity to discuss it at a further meeting. If that's, I think that would work well. Okay. But right now, if you can direct it to General Counsel Kurt Trost, any direction, any thoughts, any questions, and then he can take care of that. And then we can move forward with that new tool in order to evaluate our CEO. Okay. So items 13, chair report, board reports, executive director reports. Are there any reports that that I don't know about? Your chair does not have a report today.
Chair Jennings, it looks like Director Kozlowski has his hand raised.
Okay.
Just one very, very quick thing, and congratulations to Casey Lazan. She was one of the presenters for a presentation at the California League of Cities and knocked it out of the park. Great job on a legislative review of issues affecting transportation here in California. It was very interesting, well presented, and she had to compete with a couple of elected officials that were up there with her that wanted to really make it super dramatic, and Casey got to business and did a great job. So thank you. That's all.
Thanks for that report. That's good. Any other good news reports like that? Because Casey, put your picture back up there. Let everybody see you so we can say, look, congratulations, give her a round. Good job. All right, your future is bright out there, outdoing those elected officials.
Chair Jennings. Chair Jennings, it's
yes.
Galdo. Just a real quick one. I just wanted to say that Director Thomas and I had the opportunity to join our youth commission on Saturday and welcome them and talk a little bit about what we do. And Rosie and her crew have just done a fantastic job. And judging by the kids that were involved, the young students that were involved, the future is looking bright.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful.
Yeah, and I second those comments. Rosie was a rock star, as were those youth. We're real privileged to be with them.
So we all are starting to do some events in our respective areas, community events that bring the community together. And I just want to make sure that there's some way that we know about those events. So some of us can get out of Sacramento and get to some of the other areas of our great region. So I think I want to try to figure out some way that we can have a monthly calendar of all the different events that are going on. So I just want to kind of put that thought on the staff's mind as far as putting those kind of things together so that we can then look at that calendar and choose to participate. This Friday, I got this wonderful thing called Trucks and Such. We got food trucks out there, and I won't tell you what the such is. It could be a magic show, could be a jazz band, it could be a comedian, it could be Rick playing the saxophone that he can't play anymore. But anyway, what I'm saying is we do those kinds of crazy things, and you should know about it so you can come out to any of these respective districts. So please start sending your information in to SACOG, and we'll put a calendar together and probably start looking at what's happening in our region so we can get out there and see some of those things. That's probably the best report I got right now, James. Okay, everything else, item 14.
Director Jennings.
Is receive and file. And James, you do have a report?
Chair Jennings, and I think Kirk wanted to say something.
Okay, Kirk.
Yeah, Director Jennings, I just want to tell the board, we are proceeding to implement the new process for the executive director's evaluation. If we don't hear other comments, then there's a need to incorporate those comments really by close of business on Monday. So please contact me if you have any questions, concerns, suggestions. Otherwise, we're moving ahead. This has been vetted with the ad hoc committee, been discussed with the strategic planning committee, and with James. Everyone feels very comfortable with where we are in the process. We're going to move ahead. So please reach me before the close of business on Monday, or we're moving ahead.
Thank you. Very nice. Thanks for that update. Rich Lozano from Galt. Did I see your hand up?
Yeah, just real briefly, just since you brought up community events, here in the city of Galt on the first Saturday from 10 to 3, we have a community event that down our 4th Street Promenade. This next one is June 4th. It's going to be a barbecue cook-off. So if you're interested, get a hold of me, come down, and we'll spend a few minutes and I'll show you the great city of Galt and the things that we're doing to bring our community together post-COVID.
Great, great. And all of us are in that same situation post-COVID. We're trying to bring our respective jurisdictions together. Item 14 through 20 is all receive and file. If there are no other questions and no other thoughts, no other announcements, this meeting is adjourned. Have a great weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Right.